Welcome, everybody. That was an exciting countdown. My name is Catherine Wiesner, and I am the Head of External Engagement for UNHCR's Regional Bureau for the East Horn and Great Lakes. And I am so happy to welcome you to this first day of our first ever regional NGO consultations. And it's a bit chilly here in Nairobi, so it's a warm welcome on a chilly morning. I hope you have your cup of tea. We're really excited to have all of you with us. I know we had about 200 RSVPs. I see we have already 50 or 60 people logged on this morning, and this is our first of what we hope will be 4 really informative, dynamic, and thought-provoking days. We have a great agenda for you this morning, all on the theme of localization and particularly around engagement with communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a few presentations to start us off from UNHCR resource persons to set the scene. We also have 2 panels with a variety of national NGOs and local community-based organizations from countries around the region, from South Sudan, Somalia, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, who will all be sharing with us their perspectives on some key questions related to localization. We have a few videos sprinkled throughout the day, which I think helps to transport us temporarily away from our offices or our home offices, where I am today. And we definitely also want to hear from all of you. So we have a few interactive exercises. We have a plenary session towards the end of the day. And one of the objectives, I think, as you know, of these consultations is also to develop some recommendations that feed into various UNHCR processes. So we'll also be hearing from you and synthesizing and compiling recommendations over the next few days. So as you can see, it is a very jam-packed agenda. So I'd like to actually go ahead and get started. And to do that, I'm going to turn over to our colleagues at Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection, otherwise known as PHAP. You know, we all go by our acronyms. And I think that Marcus is here with us today to make a few practical announcements. So over to you, Marcus.
Thank you, Catherine. So just before starting, let me just explain a very few technical aspects of the platform. So if you encounter any issues, we are providing a backup video live stream at the URL shown on your screen and also shared in your connection instructions. My colleague will be sharing this link in the chat. Throughout the event, please keep your chat box open. You can ask questions and engage with the other participants in the chat. And important, we will also be sharing technical instructions there and any eventual links throughout the event. If you are following the backup live stream instead, please type your question or comment in the session chat, and one of my colleagues will be reposting that into the main chat so we have that link going. As a reminder, please keep your mic muted when you're not speaking. And finally, also note that the session is being recorded. The recording will be shared with the participants after the event. So after those very brief notes, I would then like to hand over back to Catherine.
Thanks so much, Marcus. So first, we're going to have a few opening remarks, and our regional director, Clementine Nkweta Salami, wanted to be here and planned to be here, but is instead on the road. She's actually in Ethiopia today, and she recorded these remarks and message to you just before she traveled.
Good morning. On behalf of the Regional Bureau for East, the Horn of Africa and the Great Lakes region, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our partners and colleagues to the Regional NGO Consultations, the first ever such event in this region. Thank you for finding time to join us. This 4-day event, co-organized with ICFA, brings together hundreds of civil society actors, in particular international NGOs, national NGOs, and refugee-led organizations from the East Horn of Africa, the Great Lakes region, and beyond. NGOs are indispensable partners to the collective response for refugees and other persons of concern. As the COVID-19 pandemic has shown very clearly, NGO staff, and in particular local NGOs, are often the ones working on the front lines. They are the ones piloting innovative approaches, and they are also the ones enjoying the closest relationship with refugees, other forcibly displaced persons, and the communities that host them. These consultations give NGOs an opportunity to inform, engage, strengthen collaboration, and embrace an inclusive approach in exploring solutions to issues affecting those impacted by forced displacement. Throughout the past decade, we have witnessed a trend of soaring displacement driven by conflicts, violence, persecution, and other human rights violations around the world. As detailed in the recently released Global Trends report at the end of 2020, there were a total of 82.4 million refugees and internally displaced persons. Today, 1% of humanity is forcibly displaced. The East, Horn of Africa and the Great Lakes region has not been spared. Impacted by multiple emergencies, protracted conflicts and natural disasters, the region now hosts 4.7 million refugees and a further 8.74 million internally displaced persons. Most of these 13.5 million people have also been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. As part of a whole of society approach, NGOs and other civil society actors throughout the region have a key role to play in addressing these complex challenges and contributing to innovative and sustainable solutions. Localization of humanitarian action and engagement with communities in the COVID-19 context has been chosen as the cross-cutting theme for all regional consultations this year and for the global NGO consultations in 2022. Against the backdrop of current realities, UNHCR is organizing NGO events in each geographic region to enrich discussions within the respective operational contexts. The creation of UNHCR's Regional Bureau in Nairobi in 2020 has provided an opportunity for UNHCR to engage directly with partners, including civil society actors at the regional level. The next 3 days will delve into localization in the context of COVID-19, stock-taking on the implementation of the Global Refugee Forum, pledges made by NGOs, with a side event on socio-economic inclusion of refugees and other persons of concern. Discussions will include UNHCR's strategic framework for climate action and our collaboration with NGOs to address related challenges, including climate-induced displacement. This session will cover all of sub-Saharan Africa. The theme already mentioned, localization of humanitarian action and engagement with communities in the COVID-19 context, was chosen following a survey conducted among NGOs earlier this year. The COVID-19 pandemic, with local actors often being the first responders, has undoubtedly re-emphasized the importance of localization. The emergence of localization as a key commitment during the 2016 World Humanitarian Summit presented a shift within the humanitarian coordination structure towards a response system that was, I quote, as local as possible and as international as necessary, end quote. Moreover, the New York Declaration and the Global Compact on Refugees, otherwise known as the GCR, embraces a whole-of-society approach and emphasizes the importance of engaging directly with forcibly displaced persons themselves. The GCR acknowledges that, I quote, responses are most effective when they actively and meaningfully engage those that they are intended to protect and assist, end quote. While the principle of localization is widely endorsed, including through the Global Compact on Refugees and the Grand Bargain, there is still a need to strengthen partnerships as well as to increase participation of local actors to address humanitarian challenges faced by persons of concern. UNHCR remains committed to develop and support consultative processes with NGOs that enable refugees and host community members to assist in designing appropriate, accessible, and inclusive responses. We have therefore partnered with the Regional Durable Solutions Secretariat, REDS, and Day 2 of the consultations will showcase the progress made by NGOs in relation to GRF pledges and to discuss how increased mobilization of donor funding can support the achievement of solutions for forcibly displaced persons. In collaboration with the Poverty Alleviation Coalition, we will discuss the socio-economic inclusion of refugees and other persons of concern in refugee settings using the graduation approach. This will be a side event on Tuesday afternoon. These regional NGO consultations will also give attention to climate-related challenges, including climate-induced forced displacement. For many forcibly displaced people, the climate emergency is already an inescapable reality. Refugees and IDPs often live in areas that are environmentally degraded and prone to climate shocks. To this end, and building on UNHCR's long history of climate action, the new UNHCR Strategic Framework for Climate Action sets the overall scope of our protection-centered response to the climate emergency. We all have to work together to contribute to climate resilience for people of concern and communities that host them, while ensuring environmental sustainability. This means reducing climate and environmental risks as an integral part of our programs and leveraging strong partnerships at local, regional, and global levels. The highlights, conclusions, and recommendations derived from the interactive sessions over the next few days will inform the meeting of UNHCR's Executive Committee in October 2021, the high-level officials meeting on the Global Compact on Refugees in December 2021, and the 2022 Global NGO Consultations. I once again welcome you all to these first ever regional NGO consultations and wish you very fruitful discussions over the next few days.
Okay, I'll thank Clementine virtually for those remarks. I hope that they got you all excited about the sessions to come in the next few days. I have to say, I'm looking at my chat and I'm getting excited looking at all the introductions. And there's a part of me that really wishes that we could meet over the coffee break, all of these different interesting organizations represented. But of course, the benefit of the virtual is that we were able to have more people and we have a larger group. So I can see we already have now about 120 participants, growing by the minute. So welcome again to all of you. To round out our opening remarks, Clementine mentioned, of course, that we are organizing this together with ICVA. And so I'd like to ask Marcus Rotelli, my friend, the Regional Director of ICVA, to make his opening remarks.
Thank you, Catherine, and virtual thank you to Clementine as well. It's very nice to be here with you. I see so many names rather than faces, unfortunately, via this medium. Thank you very much. My name is Marco Rotelli, and together with my colleagues, I do represent the NGO network ICVA in Sub-Saharan Africa. The collaboration between ICVA and UNHCR dates back decades, and no doubt the consultations have always been an important point. We certainly welcome the initiative of bringing the consultations also at the regional level. This resonates well with the long tradition of regional coordination, supervision, and direction of activities. It brings us all closer to the operational context, where the partnership between ICVA NGOs, I should say, and UNHCR count the most. The times we're living are certainly characterized by macro dimensions, which not only call for adaptations, but rather impose radical changes in the way we deliver our humanitarian assistance and protection. Climate action in response to the COVID-induced exacerbation of humanitarian needs and the impact on livelihood on so many around the region, and indeed beyond the region, have widely been identified as crucial aspects. A few weeks ago, ICVA members gathered at the General Assembly of the network. They've identified these as the main trajectory for work of ICVA and the members in the years to come. The complementarity of actions of the international community with the national and local organization and the communities is clearly one of the tools that we need to better understand and use to ensure that our action is coherent with the threat we are facing. Yet, there is another crucial element and a growing concern for all of us in these and in other regions indeed. I'm referring to access. The pandemic we are living has certainly affected access in multiple forms. Restrictions of all sorts posed severe challenges to the operations, especially in the early months of the pandemic. But this was a phase, albeit not concluded yet, and some solutions have been identified and tested. There's another, much more threatening phase of access that seemed to deteriorate. Humanitarian access is systematically obstructed, if not denied, and humanitarian actors can have a limited access to the affected community and the people of concern only at great risk. Recent tragic facts of only a few days ago are a stark reminder of this. And we'd like to take this opportunity to send our heartfelt condolences to the families and colleagues of the people that tragically lost their lives while bringing their assistance to people in need. Access, better the denial of it, is affecting and will affect all aspects of humanitarian action, including the themes that have been identified for this consultation. It will be therefore important to keep as a fil rouge of our discussion and debates in the next days. We need to identify how the relations and partnership between NGOs and the High Commissioner for Refugees can keep evolving and progressing, ensuring that we reach the people we want and have to serve in increase. Discussing this at the regional level is very important and timely, and can be a new and crucial perspective, and hopefully bring some solution. The legacy of decades of UNHCR and NGOs consultations is a solid base where to build regional relations, but also the responsibility to deliver toward that. And it is in the spirit of the principle of partnership, which are now probably in their 15th anniversary, we in ICVA look forward to contribute to the discussion. Wish you all a fruitful consultation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marco. And welcome to everybody else who is continuing to join us. We're now going to show a video, which, as Clementine said, is she spoke of soaring displacement, and we recently released our Global Trends Report for 2020, and this video illustrates some of the latest trends.
We do not expect the number of people being displaced to stop. More assistance is needed.
The conflict is raging. Families lose everything because of the shelling, the fighting, the bombing.
I'm truly shocked. We have here a displaced population fleeing after having gone through the most horrifying violence.
COVID-19 has shown us how vulnerable displaced people are to the vagaries of the informal economy.
Venezuelans are trying to rebuild their lives in neighboring countries. They are trying to find a way to provide for their families.
82.4 million people worldwide are forcibly displaced, a devastating tally and the highest on record. Data from UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, shows that the numbers have doubled over the last decade. Beyond the numbers lies a human tragedy. Despite a global pandemic, people continued to flee persecution, human rights abuses, and deadly conflicts. 26 million people have crossed borders to find safety. 48 million are displaced within their own countries. Several crises have persisted for years. Some are new, others are emerging.
أنا زي ده ما عرفت عنه لكن بيشوفوا عملوا كان في ماتوا شديد ماتوا والله أي ماتوا قالوا بعد ده قالوا يلا طلعوا مش أي محل كله طلع أي والله.
Tens of thousands have fled from Ethiopia's Tigray region to Sudan since November last year. Millions more are internally displaced and in urgent need of assistance. Nadia, at 17 years old, has been a refugee all her life. Her father fled Afghanistan 40 years ago. In Pakistan, he works 12 hours a day selling rice so Nadia can go to medical school.
He's my life. It's too much important to me. He's too much old, but still he's hardworking. He's dreaming that you should be a doctor.
More than 2/3 of all refugees come from just 5 countries: Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. Among the most vulnerable of those forced to flee are children. 42% of the displaced are below the age of 18. A staggering 1 million have been born into a life of exile in less than 3 years. The failure to end conflicts is robbing generations of their hope for the future. Syria's crisis stretched into its 10th year, while Afghanistan, Somalia, and Yemen are still hotspots. In the Sahel, a complex regional crisis forced millions to flee one conflict only to find themselves caught up in another. People are facing multiple threats and struggle to survive extreme weather and changing climate. In drought-hit areas, armed groups exploit tensions over scarce resources. Sayore abandoned his crops to save his family.
sabab kan kitti tondo déplacement waka.
2020 was an unprecedented year. The COVID-19 pandemic tested the world like never before. Even as infections start to slow in some countries, the threat of food insecurity and lost livelihoods brings new challenges. 86% of the world's refugees are hosted in low and middle-income countries. But there is a way forward. We must strengthen support for displaced people and the communities that host them. As the work of recovery begins, no one can be left behind.
كان الوضع نحن علينا كلياتنا هون معيشة صعبة، بس هلا صرنا أصعب وأصعب 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 نجي الأصعب، وإنه هلا بيزبط الوضع بعدين بيزبط الوضع، منا عارفين رح نوصل لهون. إجت الكورونا قعدنا على الأرض.
Even in the most difficult of times, hope shines through. Despite her own struggles, Kaukab offered credit services to refugees in Lebanon who could not afford basic items. Some countries kept their borders open to asylum seekers while managing health risks. Refugees themselves were part of the response to COVID-19 in countries that took them in.
On my side as a soap producer, first I decided to put on a lower price so that each and everyone will be able to afford the soap.
We join the call for global vaccine rollouts to be more equitable and to pick up pace. No one is protected until everyone is protected. UNHCR continues to deliver assistance to those that need it the most, helping millions of people despite the challenges of the global pandemic. Even as insecurity and displacement persist at a truly alarming rate, solidarity for refugees, internally displaced persons, stateless people, and the communities that welcome them is more vital now than ever. But above all, peace must become a priority once more.
Wow, so the global picture is overwhelming. And of course, this region features very prominently in those statistics, whether we're talking about protracted refugee situations or new internal displacement and refugee flows. And of course, what brings us all together today is that we're all part of the work of responding across this region. So I'm going to now turn to Marcus for a short exercise, actually bringing together who's here today so that we can get a better sense of everybody with us today. Over to you, Marcus.
Thanks, Catherine. So we will be using Mentimeter throughout the consultations events this week with a couple of questions for everyone in this session today. So as a way to gather everyone's input. But to get you set up and started, we wanted to ask you a very quick and basic question on where you are currently based. To access the Mentimeter questions, you can do so in your browser or on a second device such as your smartphone. And my colleague is sharing the link to the Mentimeter in the chat. That is the easiest way to get there. But you can also go to www.menti.com and enter the code that you see on the screen there, 52750190. So for this question, just go there and put a pointer about roughly where you are currently based. We're gonna keep this open for a few minutes and then come back to the results afterwards. So in the meantime, I would like to hand back over to you, Catherine.
Oh, okay. I was trying to mark myself on the map. I was trying to find Nairobi. Okay, so while everybody is doing that, trying to mark myself, We are going to move into our first presentation, and we have today with us Stella Ogunlade. She is the chief of the Civil Society section in Geneva, UNHCR's headquarters, and she's going to give us an opening presentation on localization in humanitarian action from a global perspective. Stella, welcome.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. And I'm very, very happy to be with you. Like Catherine said, I'm the chief of the NGO team at headquarters. So like my colleagues at regional level, looking at NGO consultations, but also engagement with new partners like refugee-led organizations at global level. I think Clementine has very well explained, why we need to really increase, our engagement with local NGOs and partners. So I don't want to repeat that, but I would like to just give you a quick overview what we are doing at global level to support that. So yeah, thanks. Next. And next. Okay, so first of all, to start with the Great Bargain that you all know, where we all committed to provide, funding at least of 25% to local NGOs. I'm quite happy to report that UNHCR managed to actually increase to 28% of our whole program budget that's being provided to local actors. When I talk about local actors, I'm talking here about national NGOs, but I'm also talking about local governments. And if you look at how many partners we have, which is around 1,000 partners, 62 are actually now national NGOs, and 90% globally are local government actors. We want to further increase, of course, our engagement and our funding for it. And one of the obstacles that I think many of you know who are also implementing partners of UNHCR are our very difficult processes for partnership agreements and reporting on it with all its annexes and so forth. And so therefore, I'm also quite happy to say that our colleagues have been really working on simplifying the processes and are further working on that. And there's been a reform that's ongoing, particularly also for COVID-19. I think we introduced some flexibility measures to further, make things easier. And the idea is that this will also help in the future for local actors to make our partnership agreements more accessible to them, which then again, of course, helps them to also get more funding. Maybe another thing I should say when we talk about the percentage of funding that has gone to them is that for the COVID-19 response, 70% of partners that UNHCR worked with were local stakeholders, and that we also really increased our cash assistance to them in addition to that. Next. So here you just see again the reforms that are underway. So really trying to harmonize our processes, being more simple, more flexible, improve also the risk management, which is always a huge obstacle for why local actors don't receive, funding or become partners, to make it easier. Next. Then, of course, we try to also include local NGOs and organizations that are led by persons of concern. So if I talk about persons of concern, I mean refugees, stateless persons, internally displaced persons, but also organizations that are led by women or by youth or by persons of older age or LGBTI. We try to include them more and more in all the activities that we do at local level. And that, of course, also includes our annual NGO consultation, but also our monthly NGO consultations that we started since the pandemic last year. And I think, again, like Catherine mentioned, the good thing about having them online, and even next year we will do some sort of hybrid where we have online and in-person sessions, helps us to really reach out and bring in more partners from all around the world. Then last year, for the first time, we developed an innovation award that's usually always given to NGOs, specifically for refugee-led organizations that responded in a very innovative way to COVID-19, really acknowledging the role that they played as the first responders. And each region selected their own winner. So I know so did your region, and I don't want to go further into it because I think there is more information on that. But just to say, what was the impact of that? Of course, it was great to recognize them. It was great to give them also some funding, if you wish. But what really also had a good impact is for us to be able to map them. A lot of regions, I mean, it differed from one to the other, but many regions did not necessarily have a very good overview of who's out there. And by having all these different actors applying for this award, it really helped us to better know who is where and doing what. That further will support our engagement. And we hope also that for the refugee-led organizations, it gave them more visibility. And we definitely noticed that some donors approached us and really wanted to hear more about them or even directly engage with them. Next. So here you see all the other winners. I mean, of course, you have the refugee youth education from Dadaab, so from your region, but also that you see from all the other regions, the winners that we had. Next. So what are the next steps? So first of all, what we are planning is we are planning to do another innovation award next year. And we are thinking about doing this for women-led organization, but more information to come. But even further, our innovation team is now developing a refugee innovation fund that was co-designed with the winners of the refugee-led award and other organizations led by persons of concern. And this one is really an idea where the projects that they have, that they're innovative, they can present them, and then they really get technical assistance, they get funding, they get mentoring, they get training. They're basically accompanied to help them to implement those innovative projects. And of course, here we're looking again at projects that will help the communities, but it's really, the idea is to further encourage, you know, programming, if you wish, in particular innovative one at local level. Then at global level, we are also engaging more and more with faith-based organizations and networks of faith-based organizations, because we also realize that they also have very often access to areas where we don't. But also can influence local communities when it comes to behavioral changes, for example, which was also shown, for example, during COVID, in much stronger ways than we often can. So at global level, we have some sort of interface task team, if you wish, that wants to you know, further develop these aspects and provide support and guidance to the region. And finally, we have set up last year some interdivisional working group, if you wish, but really with colleagues from the GF team, from program, from protection, and so forth. And we have also developed or established an advisory board. We call it an interim advisory board of organizations that are led by refugees, stateless persons, IDPs, and so forth. It's interim because we want them to actually set up their own transparent selection process for those members that will be then in a more permanent board. But the idea is for this board to advise the working group in all our endeavors from the beginning on the work we do, to review it, to be part of it, for example, on guidance that we draft and so forth, so that we really have them and their voices heard from the beginning on. Next. So here are the things that we're working on. This team, basically one is to develop some guidance for UNHCR to better engage. This can be, we will have a definition, but it's also our general engagement of the different division at regional level or field level. But it's also about coordination, for example. How can we ensure that, you know, they're meaningful, participate in all our planning and implementation and reporting and evaluation and so forth. So we want to strengthen that. So this is the first part. The second part we are working on is some database that we want to establish, where, as I said before, those who we have mapped and who we continue to map are basically included so that we can better know who's out there and a little bit like who's doing what where. Then, of course, to follow up on GRF pledges, we've already been consulting with them for the high-level officials meeting that will be at the end of this year to see, what pledges have been followed up and which haven't, and where do we have to strengthen those implementation. Then we want to have an information repository that should be accessible to everybody, to all of you, all of us, all local actors and so forth. Where you can find all kinds of information, best practices, guidance, training material, and so forth. Then we want to look into training. Again, training also for ourselves. How can we better engage? We just recently had a training for colleagues who are doing coordination, where we also had sessions on how to better engage with local actors, but also, of course, training for local actors. And we, as you know, we have also some learning platforms that we want to make more accessible for those actors. And finally, and very excitingly, we are working on a grant that allows for $4,000 to be very easily given to refugee-led organizations, for example. It can be given up to 3 times, so up to $12,000. And the good thing about it is it really has very minimum requirements. So we want to pilot this, I think, by the end of the year with a few actors in a few regions to see how it goes. And if that's something that can work well, then we can expand further. Next. What do we do at interagency level? So first of all, UNHCR is leading the results group 1 of YASC on the subgroup on localization together with the Somalia NGO consortia. And we have been given the task by OPAC to develop a coordination guidance for the participation of local actors in YASC coordination structure. So we're here talking about humanitarian country teams, clusters, intercluster groups, and related working groups. You can get the t-shirt. I have some echo. In any case, it is a guidance that has been, developed by the subgroup, but has been reviewed by many results groups, by the Great Bargain members, by local NGOs, and here I'm particularly proud because we managed to translate it in several languages and have more than 100 national actors reviewing it. And it has been now presented to OPAC, who just gave the last red line comments, and hopefully actually by next week it will be endorsed. So it's now with the secretariats for the final clearance. This guidance, covers issues of representation and leadership, of local actors. How can we ensure that there is translation so they understand, that they have logistical support if needed, that they have an induction on how humanitarian country teams work, that they can co-lead in certain contexts, if possible, clusters, for example. It also deals with resourcing, but resourcing really for coordination. So we didn't want to, reinvent what has already been done by other institutions, including the Great Bargain, but we wanted to look at how can we make sure that they have the capacities to participate in those coordination mechanisms. It's also about capacity strengthening, and here we really emphasized it's a two-way approach. We want to mentor and do peer-to-peer and action learning and so forth, but we also need to learn a lot from them. So it's not a one-way street, and it's definitely not about just having a one-off workshop. We also looking at visibility. They need to ensure, or we need to ensure, that they are visible when we have our, media coverage or on our donor briefings or donor reports or missions and so forth. And then it's also about ensuring that they're really part of it from the beginning. So when we look at emergency preparedness, whether it is, some minimum measures or more advanced preparedness measures such as contingency planning, that they are with us at the table and guide us and help us and develop it together. But then also for the whole needs assessment once an emergency happens, and the humanitarian response plan, and finally the nexus to development and peace and so forth. We really encourage that they are better engaged. And for all these actions, we actually have indicators. And we asked the humanitarian country teams to report on it. We haven't set targets because targets is something that we will do later on when we have a first round of this implementation, and OCHA will help us with some sort of baseline establishment. But we want them to report on the indicators. We want accountability here. Then we also have an information repository on Relief Web, and I will share with you the link where you can find a lot of information, and where you're also welcome to share good practices and guidance and so forth on that with us and with everybody else. And now we have also a framework on engagement with local governments, which was actually also a result of the World Humanitarian Summit. It was developed by several UN agencies together with a lot of local governments and with consultations in each region. And this now is with OPAC and should also be finalized in the coming weeks. Then you might know that UNHCR is also sharing the results group 2 on accountability to affected populations. We have been also co-drafting UN guidance on civic space, which is also concerning local actors. And finally, together with ICWA, we developed a community outreach and communication fund on PSEA, so prevention of sexual violence and abuse. And this is something that allows or gives local NGOs 15 to 20,000 US dollars to allow them, because they know best on the ground, how to develop measures to prevent it or to identify it or to respond to it, particularly when it comes to raising awareness and so forth. So it has been quite successful, and there will be a new launch, and you will be all invited to, or all local NGOs who are working on are invited to apply for it. Next. And there you see one of those programs, which is called Windel International Kenya, that in the Dadaab refugee camp, for example, established, awareness material, used radio shows, videos, and so forth to raise awareness. Next. So what do we want to do in terms of the subgroup? We want to disseminate this guidance and, as I said, establish the baseline and ensure the tracking of it. Then the results group 2 is currently also working on benchmarking on accountability to affected population to make also here monitoring stronger. And finally, when it comes to the Great Bargain to Zero, we are now joining the facilitation group. Next. Thank you. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Stella. I know that the refugee-led organizations online were listening very keenly when you were talking about the new Refugee Innovation Fund. I'm sure the national NGOs also were listening about the Community Outreach and Communication Fund. So some really impressive, I think, movements. I was impressed by the 62% and the other figure about how much of our funding is going to national NGOs and local actors. That's fantastic, and all of these different ways in which we're trying to develop, the funding mechanisms and the outreach mechanisms to be able to work more closely with you and actually empower the work that you all do. So that was really interesting, and now we're going to take it down to the local level. We have Rueda with us, Rueda Wangara. One of the action points that Stella was talking about was accountability to affected people, and Rueda is a consultant with the regional bureau here in Nairobi for UNHCR on accountability to affected people as well as gender equality. And she's going to give us a presentation on the challenges and opportunities presented by the COVID-19 pandemic this last year with respect to localization. So over to you, Rueda.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. I think it's really great to see the number of participating organizations rising by the minute. And just looking at even the chart there, I could clearly see that there's a lot going on at community level and from different aspects. So I'll give, as Catherine has just indicated, a presentation will be looking at localization at the regional level, specifically on accountability to affected people. This is just a fancy way of saying that we put the communities at the center of all that we do, and looking at not only just sharing information with them, but then giving that power and the transferring of power enabled for them to participate. And I think then that brings us to the whole conversation on localization, where we would like to see a lot of engagement at the local level as well. Next slide, Marcus. Thank you. So to start within the region, when we are talking about enhancing protection and developing joint solutions with persons of concern in the region, so to support localization, this is done through 4 key ways that have been highlighted there. One is through engagement with local actors, so specifically national NGOs, civil society actors, community-based organizations across the regional level. And at the same time, looking at how, and I think linking to what Stella had highlighted in terms of strengthening partnership with also refugee-led organizations at the same time. So looking for innovative and very diverse ways to engage and work with the refugee-led organizations, and at the same time looking at strategic advocacy, but then with the strategic advocacy also doing this jointly. So then it's not just one way, but then it's also 2-way, where we also have persons of concerns contributing it, national organizations at the same time also contributing towards the advocacy in terms of increasing participation of local actors. And I think the last point is looking at how we also reinforce community-based protection mechanisms, and through the accountability to affected people approach, where it's not only just about working through the community leaders, but then strengthening the capacity of community structures and providing more of a voice and power when it comes to decision making as well, at the same time using the AAP approach. And I think I'll talk a bit more on that as we move forward in the presentation. Next slide, Marcus. Yep, so just to paint the picture within the region, I think even for most who are in Nairobi, we always talk of Nairobi as a humanitarian hub for the region, but then looking at the East Horn of Africa and the Great Lakes region, there's a large presence of humanitarian and development actors. So apart from just the international level, but at the national level, so many actors are there. And even just looking at, for example, last year during the innovation awards, for the NGO Innovation Awards, we had 260 nominations coming from the region, which really surprised us. And I think even just to mention that beginning of this year, sometime in January and February, we decided to do a sort of a small pilot to be able to look at what are some of the refugee-led organizations that are current in the region. And we only did that pilot in Kenya, Rwanda and Uganda. And with that not being a very formal exercise, it was even surprising that we were able to see a total of around 90 refugee-led organizations that we even went and we went into looking at, for example, the representation, for example, of the board and the challenges they're encountering. And it was interesting to see around 70% of even those, the board of the refugee-led organizations were actually women. So it was good to see high percentage and an increase in terms of also the diverse groups of refugee-led organizations. So within the region, with this huge number of actors at the same time, there's a lot of synergies and complementarity in terms of response. Looking at, for example, also on policy, when it comes to engaging on policy, on joint advocacy efforts, at the same time also on operational areas. So for example, doing a lot of joint analysis. And I think with looking at the different coordination platforms, we've seen that coming up, and in light of the COVID-19 situation, that has really been something that has come to the forefront over the past 2 years as well, including also coming up with joint refugee response plans at the same time. There's also then within the region very strong engagement when it comes to looking at the comprehensive refugee response framework and the Global Compact for Refugees within the region that looks at using the whole of society approach that recognizes that everyone has a role to play, be it in the humanitarian sector, within the government, within the private sector as well. But then we've seen that in that platform also there's a lot of engagement of NGOs at the same time looking at also refugee-led organizations. Next slide. So when you're talking about engagement with NGOs and CBOs, so within the region, there's a lot of interagency coordination mechanisms that are in place. But then it's always good to see that there's really strong NGO participation at the same time. So to just mention a few there in terms of, for example, the Regional GBV Working Group, the Child Protection Network, and among others as well. So in those interagency coordination platforms, we've seen, though yes, there'll be room for improvement, it will be good to see how the discussion moves forward when we start going and breaking this down during the next few sessions that are to come up. Then looking at also with the engagement, looking at UNHCR taking the lead when it comes to looking at implementation of the refugee coordination platform, where we work with NGOs as partners in terms of the refugee response plan. And at the same time, the Regional Bureau has, over the past years, conducted periodic briefings for NGOs. And I think within the region also the other thing and also just aligning with the global perspective that Stella has talked about has been the increased partnership with community-based organizations, including organizations that are led by persons of concern. And this has really been key in terms of also shifting that conversation when it comes to engagement with communities, to see that this engagement can also be done in a very structured way, one through the community-based organizations or the POC-led organizations. And then the other one, next slide, Marcus. Thank you. And then the other one has been through our community engagement efforts and working with at the same time with the local actors, but ensuring that we are transferring that voice. When you're talking about localization, yes, working with local actors and NGOs is one way, but then the other approach we're using is also directly working with the engagement with the community structures at field level, looking at listening to community concerns and acting upon them. So I think even within the different country operations and within the different countries that you're connecting from, you'll notice a lot of efforts going towards setting up complaints and feedback mechanisms, then that we should be able to collect community voices, and communities can give their voices in terms of their key issues of concerns, areas of engagement that they think we could actually advance, and at the same time give feedback in terms of how well they think we as responders actually have actually performed at the same time. I think the other one is also through applying participatory approaches when it comes to programming. And so, for example, I'll talk about the most obvious on participatory assessment, where we see not only it's not just about looking at identifying needs and priorities, but also assessing and determining the capacities of our persons of concern and seeing how we leverage that and we work jointly to develop joint solutions. Then there are also interagency efforts on accountability, where we have worked with different partners across other different platforms. I think at country level, for example, in Uganda, you notice that there will be the interagency working group on accountability to affected people. The same with, for example, at Kakuma level, it's just the name that changes. On the interagency efforts, again, on communicating with communities. But then at the regional level, we also have the interagency working group on quality and accountability that also UNHCR takes part in, as well as related to COVID-19 specifically, the risk communication and community engagement working group that we are also part of. Next. Yep. So just talking about COVID-19, and I think even listening to the regional director's opening remarks, she talked about also the challenge that COVID-19 did bring. And at the same time, I think in the same video, the global video that we just watched at the beginning of the session, where we had also refugees talking about the concerns and the challenges that came up as a result of the pandemic globally. Within the region also, we have seen increased negative socioeconomic economic impact on displaced persons. Being a person who's displaced already, they're very vulnerable, but then with the COVID-19 coming in and having not only impact on just the health aspect, whereby people who are losing lives and others becoming ill, but then we also saw increased loss of livelihoods, and at the same time also looking at the social impact in terms of also looking at increasing cases of gender-based violence, for example, and with a lot of the movement restrictions that were actually put in place to curb the pandemic as well, we could see a lot of also impact in terms of, for example, looking at eroding some of the gains that had already been made, for example, in education. It was interesting to see a bit of also statistics, for example, in Kenya, where we are talking about close to, I think it was around 400,000 girls had not actually gone back to school after the pandemic so in comparison to before 2020 and this year at the same time. So within also, in terms of also access, this was really, really hampered, and especially in countries within the region that did have the lockdowns in place, where reaching the persons of concern became a challenge. And some of the displaced persons who had, for example, come to the urban areas for one or two things were unable also to move back. And at the same time, looking at also with the economic impact that the pandemic has had globally, then the financial resources keep dwindling to a situation that had already been worsening in terms of access to resources to respond to the needs of displaced persons. But with that, again, next slide, looking at also these challenges, and it was good to see that within the region, in as much as there are these challenges as a result of the pandemic, there was also the opportunity where we all did come together and tried to make use of not only our financial resources that are there jointly, but also looking at the technical expertise that we had, looking at also the resources at local level that were available, and we could see a lot of coordination mechanisms with NGO participation that were put in place, not only just to respond to the pandemic, but then to make sure then that there was also continuity of service in terms of responding to the needs of displaced persons. For example, if looking at the Regional Humanitarian Partnership Team meeting, they did convene on a weekly basis during the first 4 months of the pandemic, and there was a lot of participation of NGO partners from South Sudan, Somalia, and Uganda on diverse themes. Then at the same time, we also saw empowerment of local actors and localization of that response in terms of also seeing every person coming forth and wanting to do something. I think it is also in South Sudan, for example, we could see a lot of also engagement with youth, and the youth wanting to take the lead as well in terms of not only just sensitizing the communities on the pandemic, but also at the same time trying to see what other role can they play and help each other to be able to deal with the negative impact and especially the socioeconomic aspects within the society. And with that, there was increased participation of the local actors such as the refugee-led organizations, looking at the Innovation Award from last in 2020. We could clearly see what every person was trying to do so that we're able to respond to the pandemic. A lot of also guidance, notes and practical tools to support country operations and communities in terms of dealing with the pandemic, and also to ensure the continuity of services also did come up, looking at how we actually integrate the response to COVID-19 within our normal work. And it was good to see all different organizations coming together, developing resources jointly. Others, whatever they had done on their own, they would actually come and share them, and working jointly to strengthen each other's capacity and to learn from each other as opposed to one-way learning. Also capacity development of community structures, because we saw a lot of, because with the movement restrictions, then there was a lot of also reliance on also the community structures in terms of continuing to provide, for example, protection services, continuity of other very basic services that are needed and especially at camp level. And with this, we could see even like the joint collaboration in terms of developing very diverse community engagement structures, and that also are accompanied with a capacity building or development action plan. So like case in point, what we had also in Uganda, and looking at then providing and empowering the structures to then conduct and implement most of these services. Next slide. So looking at then just reflecting on those challenges and what did come up in terms of opportunities and how we coordinated better. One of our priorities for the region is basically to strengthen strategic dialogue with NGO partners and also to advance discussions on different themes. So, for example, the consultations that we have this week is one way that we look forward then to having more discussions with local actors at the same time and increasing on that dialogue, because remember, it's not something that is one way, but then two way where we engage and we build on that partnership. Then for the region as well, we would want to see how we strengthen engagement with NGOs in terms of operationalizing the GCR. And I think that will come up in subsequent discussions during the consultations tomorrow. And then mapping of POC-led organizations within the region. So remember, I talked about just doing that initial pilot just to see the kind of responses we would get, and also just to give us a rough idea in terms of how many partners wanted in the region. So you can imagine if, for example, in the three countries, Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya, we had around 90 POC-led organizations that we did look at. So you can imagine within all the 11 countries. So we would want to really have a clear picture in terms of the POC-led organizations within the region, looking at also some of the challenges they have and also the opportunities that are there, and how we can actually leverage and strengthen the partnership with POC-led organizations as well. At the same time, we want to also increase the partnerships. I think also Stella talked about trying to pilot and collaborating with the global level in terms of that initiative at global level that tries to see how we strengthen partnership and within the new frameworks. So we'd want to also develop new partnerships at the regional level that ensure that it is a more inclusive approach, that we are not leaving anyone behind. So we are looking at how we bring to the engagement in terms of partnership, women, youth, organizations for persons with disabilities, as well as other minorities and marginalized groups. Then I think the next one is also on learning and basically enhancing mutual learning and recognizing then that learning is not only one way, and it is not something that we will say as UNHCR, because we learn from the different practices, from our different capacities, from the challenges we encounter. But then how we do this jointly is what would actually help us to take localization to the next level. I think we've been making baby steps in terms of localization, but then we can, with learning from each other and with those case studies and cascading them across jointly, then that's how we can be able to actually leverage and make greater headway when we're talking about localization within the region. And I think lastly, in terms of the priority for the region, it's around strengthening community-based protection networks and coming up with really joint community engagement strategies with all the partners, and see how we actually truly put the communities at the center of all the response work that we do, and using the accountability to affected people approach that would actually see better engagement. So I think with that, those are basically just an overview of where we are at within the region and where we would want to go. But I think it would really be good in the course of the day to hear more from our partners, the NGOs and the POC-led organizations in this platform. And I know we are a very diverse group, so it will be good to see the results of the Mentimeter that we had just responded to initially, to see where we are and how broad the discussion will be. So over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Ruweda. I expect somebody's going to put a slide on the screen. Okay, and so it looks like we only had 34 people respond. So I think our colleagues from PHAP will go ahead and put in the chat again the code, the website and the code for the Mentimeter, so that you can let us know where you're joining from. But I think is that Rwanda, the highest number?
Sorry, just Marcus here. There's 79 people who have responded. 35 is the number roughly in Nairobi, I believe.
Ah, okay, all right. So the majority of us are in Nairobi, and then you see the spread throughout the region. It's great that we have people in Somalia, people in South Sudan. I see Uganda. Yep, and the numbers are going up. So actually, it would be interesting also to know, of course, how many of you are representing international NGOs, national NGOs, refugee-led organizations. So maybe we'll find a way to do that also over the course of today or these few days. But here we are all represented on the map, and welcome. And I hope everybody's internet connection is working okay, and you're all most welcome here. Okay, so in terms of the two presentations that you just heard, so that's UNHCR's perspective. You've heard our global perspective, you've heard our regional perspective, what we've been working on this last year, what we're trying to do, and now it's really time to hear from NGOs. So we have our first, and to get your perspective, how has that been on the receiving end, so to speak, or in any case in terms of two-way communication on your end of things. And so our first panel today is entitled Localization in the Context of COVID-19, Reflections from NGO Partners in the East Horn and Africa Great Lakes region. And to moderate this panel, we have another colleague of mine from the Regional Bureau, Alice de la Coudray, and she is a child protection and gender-based violence officer here in the Regional Bureau, and she's going to moderate a very interesting session with a variety of NGO participants. So over to you, Alice.
Good morning, Catherine. Good morning, colleagues. I hope you can hear me. My name is Alice de la Coudray, and as Catherine was just saying, we've heard a lot from UNHCR already this morning. So now it's time to shine a light on all the wonderful work taking place in the region, and I'll be introducing our panelists. I just wanted to take a few moments just to appreciate the strong commitment for our joint work, and that's from everybody's presence. We have over 160 people who are here this morning, and it's for us to learn from each other and to showcase the extraordinary work that's happening in our region. I'd also just like to take a few moments to recognize and express our deep condolences to the families and colleagues at MSF for the loss that they suffered this weekend of Johannes Haleform Reda, Tedros Gebremichael, and Maria Hernandez, who are all working with MSF in Ethiopia. This is a sad reminder of the risks of humanitarian engagement, but it's a call to continue to support and honor all of those who have participated and continue to be part of this process. So as we begin now, I would like to invite our colleague William Galbon-Ziza from the Humanitarian and Development Consortium, HDC, in South Sudan, and welcome him warmly to this platform and to hear about their work. Our first question to HDC is,
sorry, Alicia, your voice is not clear. It's cracking.
See, we can hear you, but just after stopping speaking now, you can disconnect your audio maybe and try and reconnect it again. But we can hear you still.
Okay, how is this? Is this better, Marcus?
No, it's the same now, but I think just continue and you can try it during the next presentation.
I'll source some headphones. So just quickly to introduce William Galbon-Ziza from HDC to respond to the first question, how have local NGOs been involved during the COVID-19 pandemic in the EHAGL region? Thank you. William, over to you.
Thank you, Alize. Good morning, everyone. I'm William Galbon-Ziza. I'm presenting a Humanitarian Development Consortium in South Sudan, and I'm going to hope everyone can hear me well. I'm going to talk about the involvement of ADC during the pandemic. Next, please. Yes, ADC is a South Sudan-based national organization, and next, please. And we were established in 2008, now 13 years of existence. Our mission is to support vulnerable people affected by crisis, so attain dignified, prosperous life through food community resilience and practical integrative programs. Next, please. South Sudan got its first cases in 2020 April, And since then, the cases started increasing in most parts of the country as they were raising across the neighboring countries. And you understand, South Sudan, we have the traditional cultural behaviors, the norms and practices. It was difficult for the community first to understand the danger of the pandemic and how to cope with it, especially in displacement camps. Here you can see some of the pictures where our teams, our protection teams, are trying to guide the persons of concerns during the gathering points on how to use the locally available materials to make face masks and how to distance themselves while they are going to get, for example, food or other items from the locations where they get them from. To wash hands regularly, even how to wash hands properly. And it was not easy because you understand, people eating together, people sitting together. So telling them, hey, from today onwards, so these behaviors, these norms, these practices, they are to change. Otherwise, we are going to face challenges. But with the news from outside, with the information education communications, we tried our best, and especially with the refugees, displacement, the displaced persons inside South Sudan. So next, please. So yes, we had to ensure that through our community volunteers, we understand with the cases rising, the countries put on restrictions measures where they had to close, no movement, especially even in our staff, some of our staff were not even able to travel to the places. So being a national organization, being on the ground, so having volunteers and staff within the community, we had to ensure that we use this force to spread the news, to advocate, and to ensure that the community understand the dangers of the COVID and abide by the protocols and the guidance from the health personnel and WHO. Here you can see the market days, because they continue to happen, and sometimes the water points. And through support from different donors, ADC in partnership with UNHCR had to establish the screening points at every border points in South Sudan, different. So ADC was involved in North, where we have refugees, returnees coming from Sudan, and we had to screen them. And those we see they have high fever and the temperature, we had to refer them to the nearest clinic. Others we had to guide them, to inform them how to behave when they're reaching to the area of origin, which was so effective. You understand, it's a big number coming in spontaneously. We had to ensure that we are working 7 days a week, 24 hours. Our teams are the border points, and every border points, our teams are there. And concurrently, our teams were deployed to the areas of origin where returnees are coming, and to ensure that the people arriving there, they reside well with the hosting community, but also they abide with the protocols to ensure that the spread of the virus is stopped. And of course, you understand very well with the COVID, the livelihood of people were affected. Next, please. Next, please. I'll be in the car. Okay. So we had to ensure that we advocate, and then we go to secure some funds to support the vulnerable persons whom their livelihoods were hampered, and they couldn't even have access to water. Here you can see some of the pictures where we had to provide them with drums of water. We have to be giving them the water daily because they couldn't even travel outside of displacement camps. We have to ensure that we support them with cash-based intervention so that they can be able to feed their families, their caregivers, the persons of concern. They couldn't, even the caregivers who were supporting the persons of concern, they couldn't at that time because of the restrictions of all these challenges. And our team continued to advocate and to ensure that through radio talk shows, through talking through the radios, to inform the community about the pandemic and then how they have to behave during this pandemic. It worked well. We are happy in our displacement sites, many of them. The cases were there, but not many, and not so alarming that it was so bad in South Sudan. And we are thankful to the volunteers, to the community of South Sudan to understand, and despite the challenges of the conflict, of the extreme weather, of all these challenges they are facing, they managed to cope with with the shock of the COVID, and also to abide with the guidance from the health personnel and all our staff. Next. Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm not taking much of the time. So I want to show that, yes, with it being a national organization, being on the ground, so it was a positive point to the community, so that they didn't lack the presence of our personnel, because every time since April we got the first case up to now, we are still there, we are still with them, we are guiding them, and we are ensuring that every day they hear that COVID is there, COVID, you can prevent the spreading of the virus, and yeah, we are still continuing this fight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, William. And apologies, colleagues, there seemed to be a problem earlier on with my microphone. But William, we heard you very well, and thank you so much for all that information and for sharing the details. These also will be circulated as part of the meeting notes at the end. Marcus, we're a little bit ahead, but I would like to go ahead and invite the colleagues from Puntland Minority Women Development Organization for their presentation, and warmly invite Burhan Abdullah Shil. Good morning, Burhan.
Morning to you, Catherine. Thank you very much. I am Burhan Abdullah Shil. Kindly, I will be introducing the organization and myself before I go to the question. So I am Burhan Abdullah Shil, Program Manager, PMWDO, Puntland Minority Women Development Organization. I have over 15 years working experience in humanitarian fragile context in Somalia. I have gained wealth experience through working closely with the local communities, especially marginalized and minority groups in the society, within the society. I'm responsible for planning, execution, and reporting on project assignment in various fields. Puntland Minority is one of the leading national non-profitable organizations in Puntland State, Somalia, in terms of program, geographical coverage, and staffing and facilities. Organization has earned its reputation over the years as a premier minority rights advocate. In terms of the program, PMWDO is a well-recognized for implementing high-impact, cost-effective projects in the following programs: education, nutrition, wash, child protection, FSL, and humanitarian and emergency response. The organization have well-established offices in Galkayo, Garowe, Bosaso, and Pardo. We're in partnership with UN OCHA, UNICEF, World Vision, WFP, and DRC. So in response to the question asked on COVID-19 pandemics, PMWDO has done a lot in response to COVID-19 pandemics. PMWDO conducted several awareness sessions on COVID-19 for both host community and IDPs. We also distributed face masks to schools and IDPs and put in place hand washing facility in schools, IDPs, and communal latrines. We also have done a demonstration on how to put face mask, hand washing practically to the masses or to the IDPs and school children. We also educated masses on prevention on COVID-19, such as keeping social distance, frequent hand washing, using soap and ash, and wearing of mask. Next slide. Next slide. Aid localization. Decades of being at the front line of humanitarian aid agenda in Somalia, it is commendable that the international community now acknowledges that it is time for Somali-led approaches show more commitment to work with the local NGOs that have better access to deliver aid services, especially in context of COVID-19 where access is restricted. Although despite the increased humanitarian funding from various actors that have enhanced the humanitarian response in Somalia, local actors still experience challenges in funding, staff retention, and capacity development, especially during this COVID-19, where funding has become very limited to access. Next slide. Progress of aid localization. There has been some success with some donors, preferably in OCHA, UN OCHA, managed funds that has considerably increased the local actors' access to fund compared to international partners. For example, UN OCHA, the SHF first standard allocation on March 2020, they have allocated 63% of the total fund to local organizations and the remaining 37% to international organizations. Therefore, these hence other main donors are needed to borrow leave from SHF to build on this achievement and to promote a greater aid localization. Thank you very much. That is next slide. Amy. Yeah, thank you very much. That is the end of the first part of the presentation, or the answer of the first question that was asked. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Burhan. Colleagues, apologies. I think I've had some problems with my mic, but I've moved device. So I'm going to keep the video off, but I hope that this will help you all to hear me better. If anybody can give me a little thumbs up or a yes that they can hear me and it's all going well, I can continue.
All good, Alizy.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcus. Thank you very much, Burhan and William. We're now moving to our next question. What structural changes or innovative approaches did local NGOs apply to respond to the pandemic and to ensure continuity of service within the community? I'm pleased to welcome our next speaker, Jean-Paul Ntwali from the Prison Fellowship Rwanda. Thank you, Jean-Paul. Over to you.
Thanks, Alice. Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be with you here today. As mentioned, my name is Jean-Paul Ntwali. I work for Prison Fellowship Rwanda as Deputy Executive Director. Before I start my presentation on our engagement with refugees during this difficult period of COVID-19, allow me to give a brief overview of our national ministry. Prison Fellowship Rwanda is a non-profit organization that works in partnership with the government of Rwanda and relevant agencies, local and international organizations, as well as UN agencies, since 1995 to foster interventions that promote peace building, reconciliation, interventions that reinforce mental health and psychosocial support for vulnerable people in the country, interventions that promote human rights and facilitate access to legal aid, interventions that enable rehabilitation and the reintegration of prisoners in the community. But also we do reinforce or promote or enhance socio-economic empowerment or livelihood opportunities to different vulnerable people that we serve. But also we do promote quality education, health and safety for our persons concerned, but also for other people who are vulnerable in our communities in Rwanda. So lastly, we do provide capacity building in the areas of our intervention. We do conduct research on societal issues as well as advocacy. Just to respond to the question on our engagement with the community during this critical period of COVID, I would say that we have started partnering with UNHCR since January 2020. And of course, we work closely with UNHCR here in Rwanda, the ministry in charge of emergency management, and other implementing partners under the project that is called Community-Based Protection and Legal Assistance. So we are working in our refugee camps here in Rwanda and also some urban areas of Kigali and Huye. But recently, we are also supporting emergency transit mechanism that's based in Gasora for the refugees who are coming from Eritrea, Libya, and different corners of Africa. So the overall objective of this project is to strengthen refugee resilience, engagement, and empowerment. For us, we are really there to support refugees to build their resilience, but also to ensure their engagement and empowerment in the entire process. So the project is further ensuring access to justice and respect of human rights by providing legal assistance, representation, ensuring civil registration and documentation. We also monitor detentions in the country to ensure that any detained person of concern receives counseling, legal advice, and representation. In addition, the project strengthens mobilization, advocacy, and awareness for persons of concern to ensure that they can have access to the available services, get solutions from their communities, and have their rights respected. So, in line with the coordinated COVID-19 response plan in the country, Vision Federation Rwanda adapted quickly to respond to this situation, while ensuring that it continues to work towards its core mission of preserving protection for everyone. So, in close collaboration with the UNHCR, the Ministry in charge of emergency, the Ministry of Health, Police, other partners, and refugee representatives, so PFR has been playing a vital role in preventing the spread of the disease in all locations by building pupils' knowledge on the disease, raising awareness on its transmission and preventive measures. You know that what was needed at the first was the information, to have accurate information on the disease, but also getting really proper services that are really needed on time. So by achieving this, Vision Federation Rwanda strengthened communication channels by working closely with different community structures and existing networks in all locations. So among our key achievements, with the help of the identified and trained community facilitators, youth volunteers, community-based working teams, and refugee leaders, much emphasis has been put on promoting preventive measures in communities, including practicing good hygiene, wearing masks, ensuring physical distancing measures, avoiding unnecessary movement in line with the national government guidelines. So we have worked closely with different ministries, institutions, security organs to reinforce all the measures that were put in place by the government of Rwanda. So Marcus, I think can go to the next slide. Okay. So while ensuring proper flow of reliable information and communication, we reinforce awareness and mobilization campaigns by circulating messages via banners, posters, billboards, by using community radios, by using megaphones, by using mobile speakers, by using video messages recorded, by using social media platforms, phone calls, as well as text messages to ensure that our POCs, our persons concerned, are informed, but also by ensuring that we are connected with them in this critical period. Although the lockdown measures led to higher levels of psychosocial distresses, we continue to advocate for vulnerable persons concerns for further assistance and help from UNHCR and other partners. So we have really strengthened our referral mechanism to ensure that we are really responding timely to different concerns or issues raised by our persons concerned. Next. So in order to keep connection with the community and to be able to address their daily issues, we provide communication kits to our community facilitators, youth volunteers, community-based policing teams, and refugee leaders for them to report or give feedback on all arising issues easily and on time. So we facilitate them to really to give them communication fees for them to be able to keep connection with us, but also to be able to report any case, any incident on time. So we also played a key role in screening person of concerns, mostly screening temperature at entry points and ensuring that returnees are effectively put in isolation, as well as ensuring that those in quarantine are safe and accessing health care services and other facilities. Of course, we worked closely with other partners, like health partners, to ensure that really we are screening personal concerns, to ensure that those who are in quarantine, they are getting proper services on time. So as a legal partner to UNHCR, we ensure that the POCs who are in prisons, who are in different stations, they are receiving our assistance on time with the help of our lawyers, but also with the help of our legal officers. We continue to provide legal assistance and receive cases online or in person by keeping connections with the refugee representatives, paralegals, police officers, investigation officers, prison officials, and persons of concern themselves. So in addition, our lawyers continue to advocate for the asylum seekers, conducting a detention monitoring and providing transportation to release persons of concern. So by also providing key services to a person of concern, we have learned some key lessons during this COVID-19, and we are trying also to adapt. We have seen that it's very important to integrate the COVID-19 toolkit. I mean, like thermometers, hand sanitizers, face masks into the activity base, especially for the protection of our staff, for the community facilitators, and the person of concern that we are serving. We have also learned that it's very vital and important to prioritize virtual consultations and meetings with governance structures, stakeholders, and persons of concern where applicable, to ensure that really we are not spreading the virus, but also we are protecting ourselves and our community. So we have also learned to keep ensuring a social inclusion for all persons of concern, especially people with disabilities, women, children, people living with chronic diseases, and those in prison. Because these people, they are vulnerable and they have been affected seriously. So we have really learned a lesson of really ensuring the inclusion in all the services that we provide. So, but also the staff and community facilitators are at increased risk of developing COVID-19, and further support to protect them is here recommended. So here we have seen that it's very vital to advocate for vaccine, but also some other logistics and equipment that would help and protect our staff and our community facilitators. So, but of course, there should be continued support with the resilience of a person of concern in addressing their psychosocial distress caused by the effect of COVID-19. As you know that most of them, they have lost their jobs, different opportunities. So there's a need to really advocate or support them with their resilience to ensure that their well-being is uplifted. So, as a conclusion, Prison Affairs Rwanda highly appreciates the support of UNHCR, the ministry in charge of emergency and management, and other implementing partners. And we are committed to continue supporting the refugee community to empowered and engaged in addressing issues that affect their lives, including COVID-19. Prison Affairs Rwanda, we also continue to encourage and support refugees to use the available opportunities to improve their lives in these critical conditions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting, Jean-Paul. And I can see that the chat you've really stimulated a lot of questions from our colleagues. Just to reassure everybody, for the sake of timing and the continuity of discussion, we're going to go through the presentations with the questions that were already shared, and there will be time later on in the day to address the questions that are in the chat. We're keeping track of these, but thank you very much. Please don't hold back. Your questions and comments are really informative, and we're very grateful. So I will now invite our next organization, CAFOMI, from Uganda, represented by George Francis Kiwa, which is a refugee-led organization, to respond to the question. And the question that was posed was reflecting on the structural changes and innovative approaches that local NGOs applied to respond during the pandemic. What is the role of NGOs and community-based organizations in emergency preparedness? So there's quite a lot to unpack here, but thank you very much, George, and we look forward to hearing from you. Over to you. Thank you.
The guys are going for a meeting. Other people obviously are more guarded and they're all putting on this to everyone else. Maybe they're talking to their own friends.
Hello. Thank you, George. I'm going to mute myself and we can hear you very well. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm not sure if I'm audible.
Yes, you are. It's great. Thank you.
Okay, now thanks a lot for the introductions. First of all, apologies because I'm wearing my mask. It's multitasking in a way. I'm out in a vehicle. CAFOMI, Care and Assistance for Forced Migrants, is just a correction, not a refugee-led organization. We are a national NGO. And CAFOMI is also the chair of the humanitarian platform for local and national organizations. Now, the humanitarian platform for local and national organizations was started in 2018 after the Solidarity Summit in Kampala and discussions prior to that on the World Humanitarian Summit Consultations that led to, the Istanbul summit. So just to unpack a little bit, the humanitarian platform is a platform for local organizations, national organizations, refugee-led organizations. The Uganda Red Cross is a partner, so are academic institutions and media, private sector as well. All those that have an element of humanitarian response are part of the platform. Now, the context in Uganda is that the office of the Prime Minister, I'm afraid I hadn't prepared a PowerPoint presentation, so I hope that will be fine. But the context in Uganda where humanitarian emergencies are coordinated by the Office of the Prime Minister, essentially there are, I would say, two coordination strands. The Refugee Coordination Framework under the Directorate for Refugees, the Department for Refugees, is a coordination mechanism that almost runs concurrently with one for natural disasters. Yet at the district level, the coordination of both disasters and refugee coordination under the local government arrangement, because Uganda operates a decentralized governance system, is essentially led by the district leadership. And this basically is a coordination mechanism that includes the central, the chief administrative office, together with the local leadership structure and the representation of the president's office. So there's a kind of a mirror of the national coordination mechanism, where we have a National Emergency Coordination Center, the NECOC. But when it comes to the refugee coordination, since the adoption of the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, we now have a steering group composed of all the different ministries, departments, agencies, the refugee hosting district, UN agencies, the INGOs, the local NGOs, and I happen to represent local organizations on the steering group at the national level. So when it then dawns on, on us on how we have coordinated and prepared for emergencies in this kind of context, the fact that as local organizations that are on ground, coordinating very closely and are part of the district task forces. We've had several district task forces for COVID. Before COVID, we had for Ebola, and in some of the locations where we've got frequent emergencies like landslides, floods, like particularly in the western part of the country, in the Rwenzori region, and also in the eastern region. The local organizations are part and parcel of that coordination mechanism. And as such, they are the ears and eyes, very useful resource for the district coordination mechanisms. Because within the districts, we have the district disaster management committees. This is supposed to be a mirror image of the national emergency coordination framework. However, one of the biggest challenge is resourcing. At the national level, yes, we are supposed to have a contingencies fund for emergencies to support those districts and also the national level to respond, but these are inadequately resourced, and as such, the local and national organizations or the community-based organizations that are based in the district are actually the first providers of information because of the challenges at the district level to cover the entire district. Providing accurate information, therefore, is very, very key, timely information, and the district task forces rely on that information. Yes, the Uganda Red Cross, in the context of Uganda, as being the primary humanitarian agency, which is funded by, which is formed under an act of parliament, is like an auxiliary to government. But they are a humanitarian organization that also work in close coordination with other national and local organizations. In this particular context during COVID, for example, the fact that when we look at the prevention measures, for provision of hand washing facilities, sanitation, masks, which largely link to issues of sanitation and hygiene, is not any different from the engagements that local and national organizations have had, whether it's during the COVID time or during emergencies when we had floods. So a lot of the local organizations with partnerships, both with UN partners, but also with our donors, have actually been providing additional support to the communities in the areas of WASH, for example. And this is where the districts rely heavily on the partners that are in the district to provide this additional support. As I speak right now, we, in the western part of Uganda, in the districts of Ntoroko and Bundibujo, during this COVID time, we've had an influx of refugees from, well, we're not calling them this because our borders are closed, but we've had an influx of new arrivals in the Ntoroko Bundibujo area, and on humanitarian grounds, yes, the government given permission to actually provide humanitarian assistance to this population. But had it not been for the alerts that came from both the local organizations, reinforced by the local authorities, early preparedness would have been very difficult. One of the sites where the new arrivals are now being hosted is a transit center that was earmarked for closure 2, 3, 4 years ago because it was seen as a waste of resource. Yet this is a transit center that had already infrastructure established, like water, like shelter, and to have a facility like that set up during an emergency, it's a lot more costly because then you first have to navigate having land. You've got to then find the resources to put up the infrastructure. And
sorry, dear George, apologies. You have 1 minute left.
Okay, I'm just summarizing. So basically, in terms of our presence on ground, we have been able to actually have this facility maintained at low cost, and now it is actually serving a huge population. So local organizations being present on ground before, during, after, play a very critical role in the preparedness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. That was a very interesting intervention, and thank you also for overcoming your own technological difficulties. I know it's hard to present when you're on the move. And your colleagues have really got some good questions there, so we'll be coming back to those. So in the interest of time, I'm going to introduce our next two presenters. The first from Refugee Consortium of Kenya, RCK. Welcome to Mitchell Ambasu. For the questions for the last two presenters, how can local NGOs contribute to the socio-economic inclusion of refugees and returnees as part of the COVID-19 response and beyond? So we are situated here, and I invite first of all Mitchell Ambasu to respond to the question. Thank you, Mitchell. Over to you.
Thank you, Alize. My name is Mitchell Ambasu, Program Manager, Kakuma Operations, Refugee Consortium of Kenya. Next slide, please. So I'll tell you a bit about our Refugee Consortium of Kenya, commonly referred to as RCK. So RCK is referred to as Haki House, Rights House by refugees and the host community. RCK's vision is an environment where the forced migrants and host communities access rights, justice, protection, and durable solutions. And the mission is to safeguard and protect the rights and dignity of forced migrants and host community through provision of legal aid, psychosocial support, advocacy, capacity building, and promotion of inclusive governance. Next slide, please. So RCK's history, Refugee Consortium of Kenya is a national non-government organization established in 1998 in Kenya. So that is basically over 20 years in the refugee context. It was established as a response to increasingly complex and deteriorating refugee situation in Kenya and the region. So you can see that not so much has changed there. So RCK has its headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya, but we also have offices in Kakuma and Kalobey in Turkana County, and Dadaab and Garissa in Garissa County. Next slide, please. So what does RCK do? One, we offer legal protection. RCK ensures that forced migrants and host communities know their rights and have access to free legal aid services. And this, I think, with the new COVID presentation, we're also having cases of virtual court representation. We also provide psychosocial support. RCK helps survivors to address fear, loss or separation family, and coping with stress. On advocacy, RCK influences policy and legislation making at the county, national, and regional and international level. RCK supports survivors of sexual and gender-based violence to access justice, and that is through watching brief on the court, and also regain their dignity through economic empowerment programs. On internally displaced persons, RCK supports peace building and conflict management initiatives in Kenya. On monitoring, RCK monitors the protection environment, and that is having the holistic approach. That is legislation monitoring, border monitoring, detention monitoring, that is in the prison facilities, police stations for forced migrants and also forced communities. Next slide, please. So how did COVID-19 impact socio-economic inclusion? One, we've had increased cases of sexual and gender-based violence. I've had it almost referred to as the shadow pandemic. And you'll note that, for instance, in Kenya, the data is quite exorbitant, where 45% of women and girls have suffered either physical violence, 14% have suffered sexual violence. So we need to be able to have more to be done to prioritize addressing violence against women in the midst of COVID-19 response. We've also had loss of livelihoods. And I think I've had it being referred to the existential threat, that is a threat to existence, because many people lack the social protection and have lost access to productive assets. And this leads to the next one on inability to meet the basic survival needs. And what do you mean by this? Because you look at it from the point of the entire food system has been affected, either in relation to the border closures, trade restrictions and confinement measures, also not forgetting the movement restrictions, because this is in the quest for the scarce resources that we are currently having. So, and I think you realize that with no income, then there's a likelihood that there's no food, and those who are supporting their families then have it very rough. Then we've had also increased cases of stress and mental health concerns as a result of COVID-19. You wrote that economic recession negatively affects people with mental health, and looking at them, for instance, the health tracking polls, and it shows that the people having difficulties with sleeping, worsening chronic conditions due to worry and stress. And I believe that one of the greatest human emotions is worry. In increased conflict with the community, challenges to societies affected by armed conflict and acute fragility. And for instance, given the context in Kenya, where we have the two camps with over 23 nationalities who have the different cultures and beliefs, we need to be able to have interventions that provide the linkages on good governance and peace building. Next slide, please. So why socioeconomic inclusion for refugees and returnees? Well, the first key special need is the line between humanitarian and development aid is very thin, because the interventions being done at the humanitarian front need to be able to either overlap or complement the developmental aid. Now, the other thing is, if you want to help the refugees, then you have to help build the host communities. And this is from the front of looking at the broader context, where you're able to mitigate the potential negative effects, and that is in the social fabric, that looking at the economy and also the environment. To foster peaceful existence between the different communities, as I've already explained, relating to the conflict within the communities, you look at the different nationalities, the different cultural beliefs, and what have you, then we need to be able to have that linkage between the peace building and conflict management initiatives, so as to be able to have that socioeconomic inclusion. Then to enhance and promote the dignity and worth among refugees and host communities, so that they're able to meet their socioeconomic needs instead of relying solely on the humanitarian aid. And I think this reverberates mostly in the refugee context on self-reliance. Then refugees have skills and capacities that also to include academic credentials they can be able to use to earn their living. Next slide, please. So how can local NGOs contribute to socioeconomic inclusion for refugees and returnees? One, from our perspective, is one, they need to understand the rules, guidelines, and laws or policies. Because when you talk about laws or policies, policies, whether good or bad, inform the socio-economic inclusion aspect. So once they're able to understand the rules or guidelines, then they're able to advocate to reduce the legal barriers to socio-economic integration. And in identifying the barriers and limitations, there has to be that aspect, I think, listening to the first presentation on inclusion. And for you, we're talking about inclusion of the vulnerable groups to include the persons with disabilities. And then also we have the consultations and continuous engagement with the concerned groups to address their needs. And I think I've had a lot of presenters talking about the whole of society approach, because regardless of your status, everyone has a key and crucial role to play in terms of ensuring that we have a common goal. And finally is in terms of contingency planning during implementation and evaluation. And this is important to note that in terms of, you can be able to adjust if need be. I believe the common adage says that $1 spent in mitigation serves $20 to be spent in the aftermath. Next slide, please. Thank you very much, and hope you have a good day.
Thank you very much. That was really great to hear from you, Mitchell, and to hear about the work of RCK. Those of us who spend time in Kenya know a lot of your work, and really. I will now invite Olive Ashimwe from Inkumoko for Refugee Affairs to speak to the same question. And let me just recap. We've been putting the questions in the chat if anybody wants to refer to them, because they are really quite detailed and dense. Olive, over to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to speak and to be part of the 159 now, counting. So my name is Olive Ashimye, and I'm the Refugee Director at Africa Entrepreneur Collective. So in Rwanda, we are known as Inkomoko, as you rightly put. In Kenya, we are known as Africa Entrepreneur Collective Kenya. So I'll speak on the questions, but in a nutshell, what Africa Entrepreneur Collective, or AEC in brief. We are a collection of business development services and access to finance. So when we speak of how can NGOs, how can organizations support refugees and host community, and in my context, we work with both refugees and host communities. So we'll speak on inclusion. We'll speak on how can we support income generating activities, how can we support their businesses, not only for their self-reliance, but also to be active economic actors in the ecosystem. So we do that to help them improve their lives, to create jobs, and of course to contribute to the economic development at large. Next, please. So I'll start with a story, and this is Angelique. Angelique is part of a bigger group. We've worked with refugee host communities since 2016 in Rwanda and expanded to Kenya in 2019. So we work in all the refugee camps in Rwanda, 6 of them, and 3 urban areas, and of course, Kakuma in Kenya and Kalobei settlement. So as we see refugees flee their countries with sometimes not even the 150 that Angelique has or had when she fled DRC, but getting to Kigeme, which is one of the refugee camps, she was looking at how can she provide food for her family, for her kids. But over the years, she's been able not only to provide for her family, but also to provide jobs, but also to grow her business into the second refugee camp. And this is what happens when refugees are included within I'm glad my colleague was talking about the framework. They're included into the right policies. They have the right to work, they have the right to movement, they have the right to do business and to education. So Angelique was not only able to provide for her family, but she was also able to create jobs into the communities, to grow her business to a tune of being able to borrow a loan of 8,000 USD from African Entrepreneur Collective to continue to grow her business. Yeah, next, please. Then COVID happened, and we're talking about the implication. We're talking about what happens when such big shocks happen, not just to refugees and host communities, but in this context, we are speaking about Angelique and many Angeliques that go through the AEC Africa, the African Entrepreneur Collective in Homoko in this context. So our goal when the pandemic happened was how can we still support these businesses that were still making ends meet, that were actively contributing to the ecosystem. So in the first, of course, was how can we waive interest? And that was, yes, part of the central bank regulation, but also it was our call as an organization to support these businesses to be able to stay relevant and, of course, to be able to come back to where they were or even pivot when it makes sense. So we were offering an in-person program, and the first shift was how can now we offer the same services in a different context, and we shifted to interactive voice response. This was new to us as an organization. It was new to the entrepreneurs that we're serving, but it has worked and enabled us to continue the touch with the SMEs that we're working with. And of course, having more than 30% of our internal staff being refugees within the communities enabled us also to do the minimal required movement where it was applicable. And in terms of access to finance, we had to develop a loan application so that in the circumstances that we're not able to reach out to do in-person due diligence, the SMEs are able to apply and then get approvals and get the financing to support their businesses. And of course, what was most needed is how do these businesses do scenario planning? Not just 2020, 2021, but also going forward, because we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Things are shifting, but now how can NGOs, how can we as AEC, INHOMOCO, help these businesses to scenario plan, come up with solutions that are relevant to the needs that are most current. But again, on the other side, all advisory was good, all pivot was good, but then there was also a need now to intervene. And one of the interventions that we're able to do is to provide a one-off grant, relief grants, as countries were speaking of recovery, resilience. As an organization, are also able to offer relief grants to these businesses so that they are able to cope with value chain disrupted, with high cost of business that was happening. And of course, also continuing to do matching grants, where an entrepreneur is not only able to pay a certain percentage of the loan and then get a matching grant to support the business. Yeah. Next, and perhaps last. Yeah, so as an organization, we do this through training, through consulting, through access to finance, and the digital services that I was mentioning. And at large, we look at how can organizations like AEC and the likes of NGOs support is to include the refugees, the host community into the value chain, into how can we look at refugee hosting regions as secondary cities that are not only consumer-based, but are also producer, but are also part of the big actor players of the economy. I'll pause there and thank you very much. We are happy to answer questions, clarifications, but from AEC, from INHOMOCO, that's how we were able to respond and to keep our work when COVID happened and into the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olive. And thank you so much for this inspiring presentation and for the beautiful pictures that you see that really also give us a sense of people's dignity, their autonomy, their resilience, and their ability to keep moving forward. This is really wonderful and what I think we're all here for. I think one of the things that we're lacking from being an online group is that we can't give a big round of applause to yourself and all the other presenters, but remotely, I think we're all there. And if colleagues want to go to the emotions on the bottom, I think we can all, maybe we can find a little reaction here. And I'm going to give a big clap and a big love. And I hope you guys are seeing this because these were really wonderful. We are now going to take a short break, but also have a video. So if anybody needs to take a health break, grab a glass of water, please do so. We're going to have 10 minutes and then we will return with presentations from some more NGOs and some more colleagues on 4 more questions that touch on these really important issues of good practices and learning on localization and humanitarian action. So it's now 11:03 in Nairobi. So depending on where you are, you might adjust to that. Please take 10 minutes and we will see you back here at 13 past. Thank you very much.
Nakivale is a bit big. Refugee, we are many people. We are from Congo, refugee from Congo, from Rwanda, from Burundi, from Sudan, from Eritrea, from Ethiopia.
My name is Saboni Françoise Chikunda.
I'm a refugee myself, but I also help my fellow refugee women to improve their life. I went through a lot of things. I lost my home. I lost my family, my job, everything. I was raped several times. My husband and my 4 children have been killed. I do helping women, empowering them, giving them skills, teaching them how to be independent. I taught them hairdressing, tailoring, baking mandazi, chapati, sambosa. I even spent time counseling women and girls, the one who have been raped. I start with the Women's Center with 50 women. Day by day, others, when they see the change, the improvement of others, they keep coming. At the time now, we reach for the 1,000 women. I feel so good for helping my fellow refugee in this tough time. I feel so nice teaching women and girls in these situations, because when we are busy, we are not idle. It makes our mind to focus on the future. Then when you are idle, the stress comes a lot. It makes you keep remembering the things we passed through. But when I'm busy teaching them, exchanging them, I give them my experience, even them that give me their experience, I feel so nice.
I'm a strong believer of education can change lives, and the smallest basic way you can start is books. Books open up the lives of those who read.
The impact it had on refugee children, it was, for the first time I see how much they start to believe in themselves.
Have a little empathy, have a little compassion, you know, do everything from a place of love. All we have is hope. Hope for a better tomorrow, hope for a better future, hope for freedom, you know, hope to experience love and happiness at some point.
siempre hay una esperanza, siempre hay algo más por hacer, por muchas dificultades que podamos pasar, la unión entre nosotros pues, puede hacer grandes cosas.
COVID-19 pandemic, we carry out sensitization campaign across the three settlements, the host community, Muslim community. We sensitize them of what COVID-19 was all about. We produce face masks, we produce liquid soaps, we develop hand washing stations to make sure that people maintain the safety preventive measures.
At Roshan, we realized that no difference is too small to make, and that's what we witness every single day with our students and parents and volunteers. We hope that one day there are no displaced people in the world, but until then, we will play our part to uplift refugees in Jakarta.
Pendant le confinement, pendant que tout le monde était chez soi, l'association Vivre Ensemble a pris l'initiative d'aller se rendre dans des quartiers là où se trouvaient des Marocains, des migrants et des réfugiés parce qu'ils traversaient des moments difficiles et donc ils étaient dans le besoin et c'était à nous en fait d'aller pour apporter notre aide.
Thank you very much and welcome back everybody. I hope everyone's had a quick break, stretched the legs, thinking about their questions and ready to go on into the next. Just as we prepare, I would like to also reassure and remind everybody that your questions in the chat are being captured and the UNHCR team are preparing some of the responses and the discussions, which we will come to at the end of this session. So when we finish up in about 55 minutes, we're going to have a chance to delve into so many of the good practices and the innovations and the insights that we have here. So now I would like to bring us to the next question, which is reflecting on this section on the good practices and the learning on localization in humanitarian action. For our upcoming presenter, we will have colleagues from Hope Restoration in South Sudan, Angelina Nyajima Simon. Angelina, can you hear me? And would you like to test your mic? I'm just going to mute myself for a second. So the question that you were asked to respond to was, what are the main challenges faced by community-based organizations and the refugee-led organizations? How can these be addressed most effectively? So thank you very much. Now over to you. And you have 2 minutes to introduce and 6 minutes to tell us all about it. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Angelina Nyajima, and I'm the Executive Director for Hope Restoration South Sudan. Briefly, my biography is already here. Actually, I'm the founder and executive director for HRSS, that's Hope Restoration South Sudan. I'm a human rights and women rights activist, former model and actress as well. I've shared the National NGO Forum for 2 terms. I've also represented national NGO at the humanitarian country team, that's HCT, and intercluster coordinating group in South Sudan. My organization is also a member of a National Education Cluster, as well as SAC member for Protection and GBV Cluster. Also FYEP and Global, that is the Grand Bargain Localization Workstream 2 and Call to Action. I also did address Security Council in March 2019 at New York due to the incident that happened about raping of 150 women in United States Bentiu in period of less than 2 weeks. I've also recently been appointed as a board member for Intercluster Agency Steering Committee to oversee protection paper, mostly protection policy paper. So briefly, I just need to move to the challenges. Move to second slide, please. Yes, the challenges that has really affected the community-based organization and kind of the organization that I also work with. It's mostly about the funding gaps, insecurity. Like when you look at the case of South Sudan, we have a lot of revenge killing, which is triggered mostly by cattle raiding. And we have also inaccessibility due to poor road networks and yearly flood. We also have lack and inadequate funding for women-led organizations. This has been a struggle because most of the women-led organizations in the country are not easily prioritized in terms of funding. So they're equally just categorized together with the national organization. And they don't have that muscle of competition with their male counterpart that has been in existence for years. We also have challenge of staff turnover and limited organization development strategies. We also have limited capacity of personnel. Next, please. So where there's challenges, there's always an opportunity. So what I was suggesting as a way forward to address the challenges I had mentioned, when you talk of funding gap, we think of donors to international communities to support in providing earmarked funding for local NGOs for a period until they are stabilized. Why this thing is very necessary? A lot of time we tend to get short-term funding that do not even take long, like 6 months, sometimes 3 months, and you can't really have such funding for continuity. The other thing is issues to do with insecurity. We advocate with the government to speed up the process of establishing functional rules of law, institution, and capacity building duty bearers, including law enforcement. When we try to look at issues to do with the insecurity, most of the time we're struggling with the peace agreement that is not moving in the country. And a lot of people tend to take laws into their hands because there's no accountability. That gap has been created, and there's criminals who take advantage of it. When you come again about the issues of construction or rehabilitation of roads, a lot of South Sudan roads are actually not accessible 10 years nearly down the line, because by 9 July, we're going to have 10 years of independence in the country, where barely you cannot even cross from point A to point B, because the road network is quite poor. And when it starts raining like now, you tend to not cross to many places. And even the humanitarian operation at this juncture had to use helicopters to move humanitarian workers from one location to another location because the airstrip is bad, there's no road network, so mobility is a nightmare. We're also trying to discuss these issues with the oil companies. South Sudan is a country that has oil, and that oil tends to be a curse because it's not helping the communities, not even those that are affected. And right now we have a lot of high rate of childbirth, stillbirth in the country. And the road, even where the communities are staying, the companies are not able to do anything. So we're trying to lobby such with the oil companies. and see how best they can also try to help. Currently, the government, the ministry, the parliamentarian are past the auditor, they call it the environmental audit report, in a way that they're thinking if the oil companies can be audited and held accountable and see how best they can also help the communities. We are hoping maybe that will work. The other thing is inadequate capacity. We try to look at the CVOs. These are most of the grassroots organizations that tend to be within the community, and they don't have that much capacity built. So we're thinking of how this capacity can be improved on the process and also being coached. And for this mentorship in terms of maybe partnering with other organizations, we want to see how do they also build in terms of capacity building, in terms of mentorship, instead of just having like few days training and thinking that that is enough for such organization to really do a lot on their own. Once that thing works, we're hoping for the best. Again, we're also seeking support from key NGOs, UN agencies in providing on-job training or coaching for the personnel. One key challenge is not that there's no staffing, but the question is, do you have the right capacity for the staff? And how can the NGOs that already have a vast experience to really build on the local partners that they are working with in terms of setting up a stronger system? Even if the staff tend to leave tomorrow, you still have a strong working system that will make the organization continue running. The thing is also we have issues to do with the staff turnover. Why local partners normally have a lot of turnover? Because we tend to be building staff for the international organization or UN agency, because we don't have like resources to maintain our staff in terms of paying them well, giving them job security. We tend to have short-term contracts. So when we build them, international organizations tend to advertise attractive job and they leave us. So in most cases, the local partner tend most of the time not to really get, not to retain their staff. So this has been a struggle, and it's a request if we get like a longer term projects that attract staff and also being capacity built, they can still remain and work with the local partner. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is one of the projects that we're implementing in one of the deep field in Unity State, that is in Lair. We're training women on tailoring during the COVID response when it was announced in South Sudan in 2020, actually in 2020, around March there. We tend to be given around 25 tailoring machines by UNHCR, and we distribute them in some of the locations where we're operating. And a colleague from Gambas tend to help train our women on a voluntary basis on how to make face masks. Part of this training of face masks, it has created income generating activities for the women because they tend to go and sell most of the materials that they have, most of the face masks they have made to the community, because it's an area that you can't easily reach. You have to use a flight once in a week, and not all the commercial flights are going there. It's only owners that goes there. So the communities are not in a position to really get such advantage of having face masks. And the issues of COVID is something that has gone across the country. So everybody need to have that advantage of being trained on what to do and what not to do. And in case some cases are reported, where can you easily reach? Because we only have like MSF as a health facility that is operating in the area, plus one of the national organizations called UNIDO. But then when you don't have like face masks, this is one of the requirements as a protection measures for protecting yourself from the COVID disease. So this is few things that we've done. There's another slide also is more on this. Go to the next slide. Yeah, the same, you can see a Ghanaian colleague is training our beneficiaries from the Women's Center on what is expected on them, how these things are being made. This is a skill that is going to help them. The others are even doing more that have not been captured here. They also make clothes, and they have created small shops where they are selling the material. We purchase for them from Juba and transport such material to the field. Most of them have opened small markets, and they are doing some small business. A lot of this you've seen here are some of the GBV survivors that were affected in 2013 and 2016, because Lere has been an area that was overrun during the conflict, and there was a lot of SGBV cases that were really committed in that area. Most of them have not even got justice up to today. That's the brief presentation I have. Thank you. I'm free to answer any question that is directed to me. Bye.
Thank you very much, Angelina, for this excellent presentation and the photos which really illustrate the work that you're doing. If I may, we're going to proceed to offer the next presentation to Burhan Shil, again from the Puntland Minority Women Development Organization. But if there are questions for you, we will be monitoring the chat, and then at the end of this session, we'll have a chance to respond to them. So thank you very much. Burhan, I hope you're there. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Again, so I will be discussing on good practices and learning on localization in humanitarian action. And I will be discussing on the challenges that we are facing, that local organizations are facing in Somalia and most part of the Africa. I will be brief, and I will be highlighting on some of the points, some of the challenges that local NGOs and national NGOs in Somalia are facing. Short-term engagement, capacity assessment, short-term engagement, capacity assessment, and lack of the trust of the national NGOs, lack of irrelevant and long-term capacity strengthening of the funding. So I'll be discussing one by one. The short-term engagement, many local NGOs are used as subcontractors by international organizations, which will allocate them some funds for a specific project and deliverable. When this project ends or are completed, then the contract will end there, and there is no further contact between the two organizations, the local and the national that has contracted the organization. So until a new project is agreed upon, therefore the relationships lacks the substance and continuity that will contribute towards the mutual development and respect. So this has been a challenges to most of the local NGOs and the national NGOs or community-based NGOs in Somalia, where whenever the contract ends or the contract are completed, so the relationships between the organization that has contracted the local NGOs and the international organization and the local NGOs contract, once the contract ended, then the contacts or the relationships end there, until the other project comes again, and the relationships will be renewed in that way. So the next point is capacity assessment. These assessments are required by donors and international organizations for local NGOs to access funding. The assessments are expensive. The assessments are quite expensive to local NGOs and time consuming. So this process potentially prevents some local NGOs from accessing funding, as they could not afford the assessment expenses or do not have the in-house capacity to conduct them. Most of the local NGOs, they don't have funds or the funds to conduct a capacity assessment. And therefore this process, this exercise of capacity assessment is quite expensive and time consuming. Next slide. Lack of trust. The fact that many international partners believe that local NGOs have no capacity or ineffective accountability and transparency to implement a project. So this one, the lack of trust between the national and the international, national, locals and the international organization is another challenges that most of the local NGOs are facing in Somalia and other parts of Africa. Lack of relevant and long-term capacity strengthening. The breakdown of the trust has led to idea that there is a lack of accountability, transparency within the local organizations. The national international organizations are reluctant to partner with them as they are not confident that the local institutions have the capacity to manage a large project or the sum of the money to address the needs of their communities. However, many Somali-led organizations have substantial experience working in Somalia and sometimes outside it too. So, lack of the trust has led to lead to lack of accountability and transparency within the organizations. So this one has also become a major challenges to local and international organizations who are operating in Somalia. Funding. Lack of the fund is also a great frustration to local NGOs, where since the local organizations are required to retain and maintain their staffs, maintain offices, and implement assessment. So, and they don't have that funds to retain their staffs, to maintain their offices. So lack of the funds is a quite challenges in most of that they are facing local NGOs in most of the local NGOs in Somalia. Next slide. Way forwards. How to overcome those challenges that most of the local NGOs are facing in Somalia. Long-term partnership, development, international NGOs are required to develop a coordination and a mechanism and strategies that invest in a long-term partnership and help to build trust and create a system of equality and mutual respect. So to overcome these challenges or the barriers, the local international NGOs has to develop a coordination and a mechanism and the strategies that invest in a long-term partnership with local and national NGOs. Capacity assessment. International partners to simplify capacity assessment and cover related expenses. So since the capacity assessment has become a challenge where most of the organizations cannot afford that expenses, so there is a high time that the international organization will cover the related expenses and lift and give a relief to local NGOs or national NGOs to ease the capacity assessment. Capacity strengthening, review the process of capacity strengthening to ensure that it is beneficial to Somalis, as well as mutually beneficial to the local and international actors. Create indicators that can demonstrate progressive capacity development in local organizations and provide a measure of quality assurance and progress toward the grade A localization. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Burhan. I think I'm sure a lot of what you said had a lot of resonance, and the points that you were raising about the localization of aid, the strength of local partners and their capacity, and how much progress has been made to this really came through in your presentation. Thank you very much for sharing so many concrete examples. I think that can also stimulate some discussion in the next session. So with that, let me move to our next NGO organization, which is Nile Hope, and Martha Nyakwekwa Reith will be responding to the question. And this is, what needs to change to ensure local NGOs meaningfully engage in coordination mechanisms at local, national, and international levels? So with this question, again, we'll have two partners responding. The first will be Nile Hope. And Martha, please, over to you.
Hello. My greetings to all the participants in this event today. It is my privilege on behalf of myself and my organization to be part of UNHCR's NGO Consultation 2021. I would like to first introduce myself and also my organization. My name is Martha Nyakwekwa Reith. I work in Nile Hope as a gender and protection coordinator, where we are implementing a lot of protection issues and GBV programming and other livelihood components that are mainstream within our gender protection programming. I would also like to introduce to you Nile Hope organization. Nile Hope organization is a national NGO registered in South Sudan in 2004, up to date, and it has been honing legal obligation to save life in humanitarian response using core humanitarian standards. Nile Hope has its headquarters in Akobo County under Jonglei State, one of our key locations where we are implementing the projects, and we have a coordination office now in Juba, South Sudan. I would like to introduce to you the thematic areas that Nile Hope's operation is entirely about, and this includes the health program, protection, education, nutrition, food security, livelihood, WASH, peace building, and livelihoods across the 5 out of 10 states in South Sudan. Like I mentioned earlier, Nile Hope has established field bases in all the 5 states, namely Jonglei State, Unity, Central Equatoria, and Western Baragazal states in South Sudan. Nile Hope has started its partnership with UNHCR in 2016 until 2020, where the operations of the UNHCR and Nile Hope ended. With high hope that maybe if all goes well, maybe by 2022 we'll be back to our partnership with UNHCR. Nile Hope has been responding to 2 pillars under UNHCR, and that mainly on the pillar 4. When we started the program, we started with the pillar 4, which is focusing on global IDP projects and the host communities. And then in the middle of the partnership, we had to also respond to pillar 3, which is on global reintegration project and spontaneous returns with the UNHCR program. That was briefly about Nile Hope. Now I will go straight to my few slides that are focusing on today's topic, and I will be answering a question that is on what needs to change for local NGOs to meaningfully engage in coordination mechanisms at local, national, and international levels. And this one I have put it into 3 different sections. One of them will be on local level. At the local level, what needs to be done for the coordination mechanisms to be effective. One of them is coordination meetings. I know that with coordination meetings, we could be able to be having all the information and the data that we need to be having at our fingertips. That will inform the decisions what need to be done in the long run as we are implementing and responding to the needs, and making sure that the gaps are identified, and the gaps and the issues are being addressed at the field levels. So we should be knowing this by having coordination meetings. And having the coordination meeting, this means that we should first be having the technical working groups, whereby the technical working groups should be having the leads and the co-leads that will be focusing on knowing that the meeting will be held when, and and who will be the partners that will be attending that meeting. That is one key thing. The second thing will be on information sharing. We know that our entirely work based on information that we got from the field sites. If we do not work closely with our field teams at the field sites, we cannot be able to get any information. Take an example of COVID-19. Currently, COVID-19 has done a lot of damages in all the areas, not only South Sudan, but across the globe. So the information that need to be shared for people to know how they can be able to identify the cases that are happening with the COVID-19, and also how many people are being affected during their stays in their houses during this COVID-19. So there is need to strengthen this information sharing. And then the second thing is provision of technical support or the capacity building to the field teams. I know that there's so many people that are talking about capacity building, that the partners, the local partners' capacity need to be built. Are we doing this rightly? So if this is not done, what do we need to do? We need to make sure that the capacity of these local partners need to be strengthened so that we get the really needed information we want from the field team. The fourth one will be on sharing of best practices and the lesson learned at the field level. This is very important because where the donor funded projects are being implemented, we need to come up with the best practices and the lesson learned at the field level, because when we draw these lesson learned and the best practices together, this will inform us about what needed to be done, what has been done right, what has not been done right, and where's the gap. By us identifying all this, this can help us to have a better future programming in our locations. The second one will be at the national level. At the national levels, the first thing I mentioned is about involving of national NGOs in decision making. You find that decisions that are being made regarding the national NGOs are not being made in consultation with the national NGOs. You find that the international organization representatives and then the UN representatives leaving out the people that the decisions are being made on behalf of them. So there is need to engage these local NGOs in the decision-making processes, because if this involves how the projects are going to be implemented, if this involves how the funds are going to be mobilized, these people needed to be involved. They need to be on the table. They need to discuss what mechanisms and the modalities are in place for us to be able to have the partnership effectively. That is one thing. The second one will be on strengthening localization approach. This one, I would first like to appreciate UNHCR for this, because it was UNHCR that is strongly in this country advocated for the localization aspects, because we find that there's so many national partners that know what to do and are working at the grassroots levels with the communities to making sure that their needs are being addressed. They're given the right services they need. So why do we need to strengthen the localization aspect? Let us avoid the issue of giving one or two locations to both national and international organizations at the same time. You find that international organizations, they have the big weight compared to national organization. So if you put national organization and international organization in the same location, because I know we have vast locations where the projects are being implemented, this one, the localization aspect will not be realized, because localization, we want to promote the local national organizations that are in the particular country, especially South Sudan. So we really need to strengthen this. This one, when we started it, it was very okay, but in the long run, it's not even coming out, because now the fight is all about national NGOs in South Sudan are becoming very many. And then now there is this policy of making sure that they are the number is being reduced, and the fund that is given to national organization, if you combine 10 organizations, the fund that is being given to 10 organizations, it's not even equal to the funding that is given to one international organization, because what the percentage that is given to the national organization is very small. So this one, we really need to really think and look critically and on how this localization approach can be strengthened in this country. The other thing is participating of the national NGOs in the forums. There is need to have the national representatives in these forums where the key decisions are being made regarding the entire humanitarian programs in the country. The other thing will be on having the national experts trained to lead cluster coordinations at the national level. You find that most of the clusters and the subclusters, the leads and the co-leads are whole nationals in the UN, leaving out the national partners. So there is need to consider these national partners. If it's about capacity, let their capacity be built so that they can also lead the clusters and the subclusters. We should be having standardized technical tools, including information sharing and management. You find that most of the partners, they just have their own organizational tools to be used for information collection and data management. Let us be having standardized technical tools. For example, if we are focusing on GBV, we need some information for GBV. Let us have standardized tools for that particular section. Then the other one will be transparency and accountability. And then the last one should be on the meaningful partnership between UNHCR, UN agencies, international NGOs, and the national NGOs. Let's be having this mutual partnership between all this, across all these sectors in our programming. At international level, what needed to be done at the international level? We should be having national representatives to the international forums to represent the key challenges and the gaps to the donors. Because now at the national levels and also at the local level, the people that are involved in information and data collections are local partners. If the information that we are representing at the national forums and then at the donor roundtable discussions are being collected by the national partners, then we don't need to leave these people behind. Let us be having the national representatives to the international forums where donors are present, and then the other people that contribute the money. So let us be having the national representatives to the national international forums, to the international forums, sorry. The other things will be on resource mobilization, because I know at the international level we have the representatives that are engaging the donors and the government institutions in resource mobilization. This is one of the key things that need to be done at the international level, because when we are implementing programs and we do not have funding to continue implementing the programs, I don't think there's anything that can push us through. So it is through resources that are being pulled together that helps us continue responding to the needs and the issues that are affecting the communities. And then the other thing will be on to support more systematic localization in the humanitarian response, including prioritization of funding and partnership to enable national NGOs closest to the ground. I must give one good example, and that will be the South Sudan humanitarian funds that is being provided by OCHA. Because you find that the resources that comes through this project is very limited. And there are a lot of people that are fighting to get this funding. We have international organizations, we have national organizations. So here, let us be having the priority. Which agencies are going to be given this? We know that international organizations, they get funding from their headquarters, but national organizations, they do not have any other headquarters they go to be getting this funding. So to me, I would say that national partners needed to be prioritized for such kind of fundings, because these are the people that are working at the grassroots levels. And the reality is, where they are implementing the project, you find that everything is very okay. The project they are implementing, they're moving on well, they are managing to respond to the needs of the communities, they know where the gaps are, they know where the challenges are, then they know the local approaches they can be working with the communities with. So I think there is need to prioritize this national localization to be responding this to be receiving this this funding from South Sudan humanitarian funds. Then the other things, we need to ensure that national NGOs are at the center of the response decision making, because when decisions are being made, let them not be left out, because now you can't tell me that there is decision that can be made for me when I'm being left out. Let me be involved in the decision, because I also have my own choices. So you cannot come and tell me that we made a decision that we are buying for you this when it's not even good for me. So let me be involved. Let me be involved, I be part of that, and then I know that people are really fighting for me. With these few points I've mentioned, I would say thank you very much to UNHCR, and thank you all the participants for listening. I thank you all, and be blessed.
So now I will offer this next presentation to our colleagues from Resilience Action International, and that will be presented by Vasco Amici. Thank you very much, Vasco. Over to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Vasco Amici. I'm the CEO of Wakati Clean Energy Limited and Operational Manager of Resilience Action International. I just escaped my country from DRC because of the civil war. So I've been in Kenya since 2010 as a refugee here, and I'm a party of the resiliency initiative. I always been a part of the solution of the problem facing with the refugees. So the Resilience Action International, it is a refugee-led organization here in Kenya, and I'm among the board of directors. Next. Let me talk about the organization. Resilience Action started as a self-help group in 2010, and we registered it as self-help group. During that time, we never had anything like getting grant or what. So 2014, we registered the organization to be a CBO, a community-based organization. During that time, we really developed to have some grant that we normally have received from different donors, where we have introduced our program, like livelihood, vocational training, education among the refugees here in Kakuma. 2016, we registered it officially to be a non-profit organization, and with the same mission, with the same program as livelihood and also vocational training. And also we introduce a section of the reproductive program. 2019, we changed the name that we are using today from SAVIC. Before we have been calling as SAVIC. SAVIC stand with the solidarity and advocacy with vulnerable individual classes. But 2019, we changed the name to be RAI, that's Resiliency Action International. And it's where now we started developing more partners to get funds and also to think how to expand the organization. And up to date, we have a branch in Tanzania in a camp called Nyarugusu. That's how the SAVIC came. Let me go to the next slide, please. Yes, let me talk about our current program that we are running as Resiliency Action International. We have a tailoring and fashion design. We have the ICT courses. We have financial and literacy classes. We also have English beginner and different level of English. We also have the global English, the global English learning, and good start that we have a collaboration with the Savior project. Next slide. Next. Okay. During this pandemic of the COVID-19, our tailoring class start making face masks, whereby we produce 3,000 face masks and we give them free in different communities and also different influential people. That was a collaboration or a support from EPAS we get from the US. We also distribute food to the vulnerable women and disabled people. Over 30 households benefited from our food. That was in a collaboration again with the Savior project. We also do community solicitation during this COVID-19. We also use influential people to sensitize, and we also go around the community, different community, because we are among the refugees here. And whatever we are doing because we are refugees, and we can give direct information to our colleagues that we are living together. So we also give them some guidance provided by the WHO. We also try to use social media to spread the information about COVID-19. Next slide, please. Okay, I think I don't need to talk much on the engagement of the for the organization or for non-profit organization on the coordination mechanism. I don't need to talk much because Martha, Angeline have talked a lot. But we as a refugee-led organization, we have some different challenges and also what should be done for us refugee-led organization. We can just be involved. So let me start with the challenges that we have, as other colleagues have already said. One, it is about the funding. We have a lot of issue as refugee-led organization. We lack of funding. I know many people talk about trusted. The international NGOs or the UN and other implementing partners, they don't trust refugee-led organization because they feel that refugees, they are the people who don't have enough capacity to run the organization or to do what. So that is that misunderstanding that we need to change as a humanitarian setup. Okay, we need to be, what should be done as on the refugee-led organization? We need to be involved on the framework and all the solution or any decision making. We should be involved in the UNHCR decision, in donors' decision. We have to be involved because we are also a part of the refugees and we have voices of refugees around us. So we should be involved to get those information, to make some decisions on anything that can just come out for the refugees. That is that bridge of legal we don't have good documentations that the UNHCR and the government has to advocate for, because as we have asylum seekers, we have refugees who are mandated. So those documents are not enough for a refugee to get a very good job. That is work permit class M is there for the refugees so that they can apply and get a very good job to do. But you see, because we don't have we have that legal barrier, we are not able to access more opportunity, the outside and inside. For the refugee response, for implementation, we need to include all local CBO, NGOs, and refugee-led organizations to come together to advocate for the funding and anything that can just be benefiting the refugee in all the world. Next slide, please. Okay. Let me talk about some of the solutions that refugee will need. As I said, that first should be the funding, and that will make it easier for us to do to prioritize the problem that's facing by refugees. Because we know whatever we need, we know whatever we are facing. So we are here as refugee-led organization. It's not only the resilience, but we have many, many refugee-led organizations around the world that also should be involved in decision making. So we have to come with a solution that will put specific pillars to make some decision. So I don't need to talk a lot on this solution because Martha also talked a lot about them. So I think we have to move for the next slide because some of them, they are like the same. Thank you so much. And I hope this will make some changes to us as a refugee-led organization and as a local organization to get fun around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pastor. We really appreciate your interventions and the questions that are coming through on the chat. So we're running a little bit over time, but I think we've still got two very important voices to hear from. The next will be Youth Voices Community, and I would like to invite George Dalaga Tebalaya to speak. And the question is, how can the partnerships between UNHCR and local NGOs and refugee-led organizations be further strengthened to enhance collective action and effectiveness of humanitarian responses? What opportunities for joint advocacy? I think this is a question that will really give us some food for thought. So thank you very much. George, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting me. My name is George Talaga. I'm a student at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, currently pursuing my bachelor degree in political science. I'm also the chairperson. I'm also the chief communication officer at Youth Voices Community. Youth Voices Community is a duly registered refugee-led community-based organization, which is geared at responding to a variety of refugee need at community level. Yeah, over the time, Youth Voices Community has been doing concurrently advocacy, capacity strengthening, education in emergency support, and Educa, which is an e-platform where refugee products get to be showcased and sold to the world. Yeah, next slide, please. When responding on the question, Youth Voices Community have come up with the following strategies. One of it being understanding and alignment of the course and visions and mandates of each stakeholders. In partnership, we understand that the various stakeholders have different objectives, and in such, we are supposed to align our vision, mandates, and objectives so as to achieve a common end. Yeah, next slide, please. Secondly, we can enhance our partnership through having collective interaction and decision making. Enhancing collective interaction in the wake of paradigm shift, occurrence of problems is a key for partnership. For example, in partnership, people are faced with a lot of challenges and particular decision making, where it is very vital for all stakeholders to be engaged in decision making. And thirdly, next slide, please. Next. Yeah, Youth on the Move. YVC have done the following programs. For instance, since the advent of COVID-19.
Okay, looks like we have a little technical problem, so we'll just give George a moment to come back. But I hope that you can. George, you're with us again. Hello, George.
Hello, hey Alice, how are you?
Yes, good, yeah, great, we can hear you.
I think I can step in for George, who is probably having some technical issues. But I'm the chairperson of Vivid Voices community, and I'll be helping George in this. He's already spoken much on the introduction of the YVC, and he already spoke about the Youth on the Move project we've done. We're doing digital literacy trainings, and we also did some collaboration on COVID response. Previously, we've also done production of IC materials for refugees with visual and hearing impairment. And this we did in collaboration with UNHCR. We've done a collaboration with Mshule, and currently we are on an Unseen Boundaries advocacy project that we're doing with Data for Change and Defy Hate now. Our biggest leverage has been working either in collaboration or in partnerships for most activities, since we believe in the spirit of strengthening partnerships. Next slide. Yeah, so in responding to the question, I think George had already started on this. You can just go next and next. Yeah, next. So I'll go to number 2. I'll just previously go previous. So number 2 is collective interaction and decision making. So in this, we're talking about enhancing collective interaction in the wake of paradigm shifts, occurrence of problems bringing NGOs and local NGOs into the tables of decision, since they're the ones who best understand the values and the problems that refugees face. Next. Next. There's also enhancing capacity of NGOs and RLOs and thinking long-term. Part of the previous presenters talked about this, but this can be achieved through understanding the challenges of NGOs and RLOs in the face regarding their humanitarian action and social responsibility, subsequently developing an alternative approach that would focus on long-term joint strategies, capacity enhancement, resource mobility, financial flexibility, and management of openness through involving of the founders of these NGOs and top management, and those in leadership roles to ensure the alignment of visions and values, hence building trust between UNHCR and RLOs. Much of this is being seen with UNHCR and also NGOs such as Save a Project. We're starting to do some capacity strengthening courses, and we think that this is the right way to go. We need to increase that capacity training for NGOs to think long term on how we can come together to to respond to some of the challenges. There's also increased workshop trainings to the RLOs and NGOs serve. Again, this is to enhance skills transfer, capacity building to enable NGOs and RLOs to effectively solve problems and increase the competence of these NGOs and RLOs without the concurrent supervision from external factors. So what we have seen in our experience working with refugee organizations and other organizations is that there's often some supervision from external factors which would increase cost and timing and spending more monitoring and monitoring time. I think it's best that we increase the capacity of NGOs, increase workshops so that we are able to have NGOs and RLOs work independently, but also concurrently with support from RLOs. Next slide. There's also encouraged direct community participation. This is key, as seen from the different presenters. We know that without involving community, without involving the people that are affected the most, we would not be able to respond to the challenges better. So we're saying that the community should be put at the center of the partnerships to prevent controversies. The fact that most of our core values and visions are aligned and is intended to alleviating human suffering, specifically to refugees and vulnerable communities. In this regard, in the course of the partnership, there should be direct coordination and cooperation between UNHCR, community leaders and NGOs and RLOs to foster meaningful agenda setting and execution, incorporating of inputs, views, and thoughts from people that matter, hence fully understand the core challenges and focusing on its redress, thereby leading to our successful partnership and execution of our joint advocacy and creating a meaningful, sustainable collective action that reflects to these refugee communities and vulnerable locals. I think this is a great thing we need to do. There's also enhancing collective action. Collective action problems should be looked upon. This is just bringing all of us together and understanding that everyone has something to bring into the table. We are all valuable and we should just come together to achieve our common goal. Whether an NGO doing something on education, doing something on livelihoods, we should come to have a collection action to alleviate the refugee suffering and challenges. There's also improved communication. This should be key. And what we're saying is that there should be prompt and timely flow of communication from UNHCR to various NGOs and RLOs and vice versa. So NGOs also to be talking to UNHCR more in a more improved way should be strengthened. Individuals and stakeholders' behavior and action towards a certain goals and agenda tends to be refocused by the presence of a timely communication to act as a reminding tool and push factors to act accordingly. And lastly, to say that a calendar that is aligned to the values should be developed and shared among all stakeholders to act as a driving tool to foster and encourage various stakeholders to act within the specific time frame, hence beating the tax targets. And lastly, last slide. So this is our conclusion. To effectively strengthen the UNHCR partnerships with the NGOs and RLOs, a collective sense of self-responsibility, increased positive attitude, and increased concern towards the partnership should be employed as tools towards the realization of our collective action and the quest of humanitarian advocacy, hence achieving our goals, enhancing sustainable policy implementation that shall increase joint opportunities for all. And thank you so much. So those are our points, and we believe that if some of those are put into action, we'll be having a great partnerships moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jean-Marie. Thank you very much for your time and your consideration, and also for, we were grateful that you were able to step in when George's technology didn't support him. But as yours is the last intervention, we'd really like to appreciate everybody's contribution and words. Lots of really good questions, lots of good comments in the chat. We're going to be moving to that now, but let's all give a reaction, and there's a button at the bottom here, and I will start off. Really very, very impressive contributions. Excellent work. Thank you so much for this enriching conversation. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Mark Nzano, who is also with me in the CBP unit at the Regional Bureau. And Mark will lead us now to the Q&A to discuss some of the questions that you had all put in the chat. So thank you very much. And a digital round of applause to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alize, for that. My name is Mark Nzano. I'm at the Bureau. We'll go straight to the comments that you've presented. The first one is from Ogle of DRC, who acknowledges the opportunities for further conversations in the areas of synergies with RLOs. And he's also requested for contact. We'll hook you up with that, contact with the Kenya team. From Felipe was also seconding the increased capacities to RLOs in terms of support for livelihood, in terms of bakeries, marketing, production, and so forth. So we do note that. Now we'll go straight to the questions in the interest of time. And the first one will go to my colleague Ruwaida, and it comes from Ahmed. The question is, what are the efforts and role of UNHCR during COVID pandemic, and also how this did affect the humanitarian interventions and accessibility to persons of concern in the areas of operation? So over to you, Ruwaida, for that.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you, Ahmed, for your question. So basically within the COVID-19 response, and I know I will not be doing justice when I respond to this question, I think we could talk about fast deployment in terms of protective wear, so like the PPE kits, some machines that were needed with the ventilators and necessary medication within the camp operations. The other thing has also been that at regional level, we've kept advocating for inclusion of refugees in the vaccination program. As you are aware, there's the vaccination exercise that has been going on across the different countries, but then that component of including refugees to access the vaccines is what we've also been advocating for. In terms of livelihood, looking at the economic impact the pandemic has had on refugees, we've also looked at giving cash grants to support some of the most vulnerable who've been affected by COVID-19 in most operations within the region. And I think one of the key ones, and I think we've all been working jointly on this with a lot of US partners, has also been on risk communication and community engagement when it comes to preventing and responding to the pandemic. So we've worked at regional level, at interagency level, and also working with the different country operations in terms of strengthening their capacity, but also in terms of developing the messages and strengthening also the community structures and providing them with the necessary support they actually need. Excuse me. You talked also about the issues of access. So for access, it's really mainly it's related to government policies and depends and varies from one country operation to the other. So for countries that had put in place restricted movement between regions, for instance, that also meant that some refugees did get stuck. For example, I'd say an example like when we were looking at the feedback we were getting through our feedback systems in Uganda, there were some who had come maybe to follow up on a certain process in Kampala and ended up being locked in Kampala and had to wait for a few days or months to be able to head back to the northern side as well. So it did hamper a bit in terms of between regions, but I think also the strict lockdowns also made it impossible to also reach some of the refugees during especially the onset. So if you look at last year, between March and maybe June, July, there is where there were really lots of challenges in terms of movements. And I think that's where we saw also a lot of creativity from US, our partners, and also from the refugees themselves in terms of looking at ways we could still engage remotely by empowering the community structures on ground, and also for the areas where connectivity could allow using the digital platforms as well. And I think also issues of cross-border movements, those were greatly interfered with, but this was mainly due to government regulations. And in most cases, it really depended on the government regulation on ground. Yep. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you for that, Ruwaida. I think your response has also covered the question that was to be addressed by Jane in terms of accessibility of legal services during COVID lockdown. The next one will go to Vasco. Vasco, this is from Rose, Trickle Up. She asked, for all organizations, were there specific populations that were harder to reach, and why? And how were organizations able to overcome this? Over to Vasco.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. One of the barriers is enough funding to reach population. And it is not all the RLO who got money during this period to distribute or to give face masks or to do anything during this period. So we only target the number according to the funding that is available. But we also thank the UNHCR because we also try to reach out more a very big number, the people to get face masks and to get the information. So this specific number goes depending on the funding that is available.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vasco, for that response. I'm not sure if we have Stella online. Stella Olgola, the next question is yours.
The next question on the competition. Can you hear me?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think it's a bit tricky. I think the vision is a little bit that, local partners, whether they are NGOs or organizations led by refugees or stateless persons, IDPs, women, and so forth, become equal partners like international NGOs. I think that's a little bit our overall aim. And like I presented this morning, we are aware that the capacities are different and that local actors have more challenges, and we do aim to streamline, to make things easier and more accessible. But having said that, I think when it comes to an operation, then I think, in the end, we will aim to have a selection process like we would have with any partner. So that would be, to see, okay, in a certain context, who are the partners who are out there? What projects or activities, do they suggest? Where does it make sense? How can we do that? And so forth. So I think the criteria then, on the long run will be a little bit like it's also with international NGOs to see, what does make sense where. And if there are several actors, several local NGOs, then I guess they would have to discuss with the country offices as well which NGO could maybe support the issue the best way or address it the best way. Over.
Thank you, Stella, for that response. I'll now head over to RCK. RCK, Mitch, this question is for you. How do you ensure that only the most vulnerable households are targeted with your interventions in a context where almost all refugees were rendered vulnerable during COVID?
Thank you for that, Mark Zano. I had responded in the chat, but then I can just rehash it again. For RCK and I think many partners in, for instance, in CACOM operation, we use the referral pathways, and that emanates from the community structures. We also have the partners, and also the supported by UNHCR, so that we're able to identify using the protection monitors on the ground, and then also the community structure, so that we're able to support the vulnerable host households in specific needs, because you understand the protection aspect can be a bit broad, so we have to be able to know exactly which particular beneficiary can be supported and how best can they be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch, for that. Over to Roida for this one. It's specifically for UNHCR in terms of registration. The question is, how was UNHCR able to overcome barriers on registration to ensure that access to services were there for persons of concern? Over to you, Roida.
Thanks, Mark. I think even looking at that question, there was the bit also around looking at how effective our response had been. And I think in terms of the effectiveness, it would really be us being quite biased if we are to respond to that. So I'd say in terms of effectiveness would be good if then it is those who are recipient of our services to look at how effective we have been, and also the partners in terms of the coordination. Specifically on registration, I think with the registration is not one of the areas we had a major barrier on, because we really had those basic services that we were still able to continue providing the necessary services. And in platforms where, for example, we also saw a lot in terms of some country operations moving towards the online service request system. So for example, in Ethiopia with the digital complaint and service request system, where our persons of concern could log online and book, for example, an appointment and all these other things, and also give their feedback. So I'd say I wouldn't call it really innovative, but moving towards the using the digital platforms in terms of to manage and align to the COVID restrictions. So to book an appointment online, for example, to be able to manage the numbers and try to also implement some of the COVID-19 restrictions in terms of social distancing within the registration facilities. But I think with the registration component is one of the key areas of service that were among the very critical ones that within most operations we were still able to do and did not discontinue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roida, for that response. In the interest of time, I'll throw this to Burhan. Burhan, the question is from Priscilla, and she asks, what are the main reasons for lack of trust in local NGOs by international NGOs? What are the main reasons for lack of trust in local NGOs by international NGOs? Maybe that would help forge a way forward on issues of creating trusts issues between the two. Over to you, Burhan, if you're online.
Thank you very much for your question, Priscilla. Basically, most of the international NGOs, they don't have that trust with local NGOs, since most of the funds previously, despite the strategies of standard allocation that was came up with SHF, previously the donors used to bring the funds through the national and international NGOs to our local NGOs or national NGOs. So due to that, since most of the local NGOs, they don't have personnel, the experts, but now they have that experts and they have done a lot of capacity buildings in that was given to the international organizations or the UN agencies. Now that has developed a sense of interest between the local and the international organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Burhan. Of course, just to let you know that we have a lot of questions from all participants, from most of you. We shall not be able to address all of them at this point, but we have captured them and documented them, and we'll also be able to share with you the responses on a note that we shall prepare after this meeting. Since it's 12:30 and we have 2 more sessions to go, I will quickly hand over to my colleague Ruwaida as we proceed to the next session. Over to you, Ruwaida.
Thank you so much, Mark. And we really do apologize that we've not been able to go through all your responses, but we will coordinate and hope, and share the responses as well in the meeting notes. So apologies for that. So for this next session, I think looking at the discussions in the chats, there have really been good recommendations that have been coming up. Thank you to also the panelists who've been here. Apart from just reflecting from where we've come from, there's really been a good indication in terms of where would we want to go. I think we've all touched a bit on what needs to be done in terms of coordination, in terms of resource allocation, in terms of strengthening our partnerships, bringing the voice of the communities in all this directly as well, in terms of strengthening the community-based protection mechanisms, and even looking at how we've moved towards doing a lot of joint efforts. So around the analysis, around looking at also joint risk management and risk analysis, looking at a lot of the issues that have come up in the chat, and even look at how we would jointly work together instead of competing against one another, but foster that partnership and collaboration even as we move towards learning and strengthening each other's capacities. And I think reflecting on all these really engaging and fruitful discussion, it would really be good and to hear from you, because remember when we started, we talked about this not being something that is one-sided. So we will have a Mentimeter, and it would really be good to hear from all of you who've been participating in this session, looking at from how we started the session early in the morning until now. Reflect on all the discussions, what you've also been engaging and suggesting, and give us one recommendation that you think we should take up as a way forward in terms of strengthening localization. So it doesn't have to be just one-sided in terms of what UNHCR does, but what you think we could jointly do. So Marcus, if you could have the instructions to the Mentimeter in the chat. Yep. So I would like you to just reflect on that and share one recommendation on the way forward so that we can jointly strengthen localization within the region. Thank you for that. Yep. So there is the link to the chat. The link to the Mentimeter has been provided in the chat. Please go online and key in your one recommendation and submit. Thank you very much. I think I'll give us maybe a minute to do that. And just after that, I will hand over to my colleague, Josephine Gebe, who is the Senior Community-Based Protection Officer in the Regional Bureau. Over to you, Josephine, after the colleagues have just responded to that in a minute. Thank you.
Ruwaida, thanks for the beautiful presentations and moderations that have been done by all partners. And we are now reflecting on the way forward. Sorry, let me put on my camera. We are now reflecting on the way forward. And we've got the Mentimeter. Ruwaida, confirm if all is in now.
I think all is, hello, I think it's all coming in. Maybe Marcus can confirm if people are still keying in. There's a lot that's coming in.
Yeah, and we've seen capacity building as one of the key areas. And we also have more engagement with the community-based organization. And then, more NGO participation in UNHCR decision, UNHCR to link national actors with the INGOs. We also have refugee-led organizations can play important roles in filling the gaps. And building capacity cuts across many of the information on recommendations. Earmark funding has come up, improve coordination capacity building, multi-year funding as well. And we have evaluating progress and impact of localization initiatives in the region. More engagements with CBOs, national NGOs, and INGOs. These are all very, very interesting ways and the way forward in terms of engagement and coordination. I fully agree with presenters on the partnership, ensuring that there is trust in the partnership. We build the confidence from each other. We can also try to simplify assessments, ensuring that local NGOs are able to participate in that. There is localization partners, including RLOs, as equal partners. Indeed, in partnership, we have equal partners, and also we need to ensure that there is that recognition and trust. Joint planning of refugee activities between UNHCR, NGOs, and CBOs is key. We should ensure that we have that, and that will make our work effective and build also the capacity of community structures. I think there are very many things coming up, multi-year funding for local and persons of concern, led organizations, to ensure that there is a sustainability of work, evaluating progress and impact of localization initiatives in the region. That's a very good one. I think we have embedding.
Many of them are very.
Embedding RLOs in the regular UNHCR work plans. Of course, trust is critical, and we need to ensure that we adhere to the partnership guidelines and support localization. Flexibility in our work in terms of donors supporting localization, that is very, very interesting and need to be looked at. I think we have gone through a lot of what has been shared as recommendation, meaningful and authentic engagement. That is it in the partnership, improve coordination and capacity. We've looked at that. I think we've looked at many of the recommendations done, which are really brilliant recommendations. So we will work closely with the NGOs, the local NGOs, the INGOs, and the community, the persons of concern, to ensure that we work collectively and are able to deliver in a timely manner. I think it's, like somebody said, the session has been great, indeed. It has been great. And there is about technical staffing. Someone mentioned the turnover of staff and how local organization staff are being recruited by INGOs and later fall through the cracks. That means we need to have a continuation plan when we are developing the capacities of local actors. I think in terms of the recommendations, we can stop here because we've gone through all, except if there are more to come. But it has been wonderful and great recommendations, good partnership in this consultation forum. And I now hand over to Ruwaida. We need to, yeah.
Thank you so much, Josephine. I think on my part, it's handing over back to Catherine, who gave us a really energetic start to then give us the same when it comes to concluding the session. Thank you so much.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm having a hard time starting my video. It says my camera's not starting, but I will just go ahead and speak and want to add my really incredible heartfelt thanks to all of the presenters today, to the moderators and facilitators as well, of course, but it was really great to hear from so many different organizations and also to see in the chat how the different perspectives that you were sharing were really resonating. And so then to also thank all of you who offered your comments and your questions in the chat. I think we've already noted that there was so much that of course not all could be addressed sort of on air, so to speak, but that certainly we are compiling everything, both in terms of what's on the Mentimeter and also what is in the chat, and that these will feed into the official conclusions and recommendations from these consultations. There will be a report which will go to our executive committee meeting in the fall, and to all of you as well as participants. So I want to thank everyone once again. It was really a great series of sessions. Thank you all for staying with us a little bit late. Just to give you a little bit of a preview for tomorrow. Tomorrow, I think, is our longest day in terms of having a morning session and an afternoon session. The morning session tomorrow starts at 9:30 until 12:30. The theme is that's Nairobi time. I know you're not all on Nairobi time. The theme is the operationalization of the Global Compact on Refugees and implementation of pledges from the Global Refugee Forum, which was held at the end of 2019. So both in terms of NGOs' own pledges and as in terms of supporting the policy and other pledges made by refugee hosting governments in this region. We will then, after a 2-hour lunch break or work break, perhaps at 2:30 to 4:30, have a side event to which you are all invited, which has been organized with the Poverty Alleviation Coalition on Socioeconomic Inclusion of Refugees. So we look forward to seeing all of you again tomorrow. Thank you again for your great participation today, and please have a great rest of your afternoon. Goodbye.